Big business.
RSK, let it play, boy.
Yeah.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. I wake up and say me a prayer, brush my teeth, babe, then I throw on some threads. Wash my face, grab a cup, pour me some yum, put on my backpack, then I'm off to the bread. I eat these devils for breakfast, gotta be careful. Whole lot of blood being shed in the streets. World is so wicked, I weep for the living, I drop a free church for the dead. All my white friends in my pocket, or either they loading onto this black card that I swipe. Say every time that I drop it, the verses be hitting more harder than problems of life. Rich, I collected 2 pennies from every person that willingly gave me advice. Being afraid can't exist in my spirit, I'm fearing no man but the Father in Christ. I put in work with the brothers, we stood on them corners from 10 to like 9 the same night, teaching our people the gospel, equipped with a camera, some posters, some speakers and mic. Every time that I see mama, she telling me, son, you gotta walk in the light. Christ, the bread of heaven, keep feeding my spirit, and I wanna low, not a slide. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
When I tell you I'm an Israelite, tribe of Judah, don't you take it personal. Plead the blood on these demons, we purging them. Don't entertain Jezebels, we be curving them. Ayy, I got a ribbon, she virtuous. In person, this blue life ain't virtual. I can't forget when I heard the truth. I got cut with that word, it got surgical. Conviction can lead to repentance. I pray these verses encourage you. We repented, now we on the vertical. Judah rising, see Isaiah 32. Big business, nothing minuscule. I picked up that pen back in middle school. Guard your light and take heed who you listen to. Watch your mouth and your ears and your vision too. Hashatan and Shalkani won't finish you. In Mortal Kombat, this war is not physical. Gird your loins up and follow the general. Messiah is coming, that's scriptural. You gotta starve your flesh. The real war ain't even started yet. This look like a setup for a second exodus. I'm trying to be where the water at. Let's get it.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
Shalom. We're back. Got a special show for you guys. And you're right, Chemo, Ben Israel. Big business, nothing miniature. This guy is a phenom. He's a genius. This brother disseminates information like no other. So with no further ado, we got the Hebrew of Israel, and he's going to be breaking down the origin of the Semitic people. All right, my brother, the floor is yours. Take the helm of the boat, man.
All right, shalom, everyone. As he said, this is the Hebrew of Israel. And a quick look for y'all. This is very to our studies to understand the ancient ancestors of the Israelites. So let me pull this up.
Right, so you're going to be covering. Okay, you got it. Okay, I was going to filibuster until you got it on the screen. Go ahead.
All right. Let me see if I want to do a full screen.
Yeah, we can get our audience ready for you, man. Get your pens and pads and notebooks and your phone out so you can take some notes. This brother's going to give you a lot of pertinent information on the subject of the origin of the Semitic people.
All right, so this is the preface, the introduction, and outline. What is my goal? My goal is to search for the descendants of the ancient Hebrews of Israel. In order to do this, we have to reach back into the past to learn about the origins of Semites, Israel, and the surrounding nations. So, why is this important? Personally, for me, it's important because I love history and I love studying the ancient world and understanding it. I have a minor in history in college, and I've just always been interested in the subject of ancient civilizations. And I'm naturally I'm naturally attracted to uh, that type of academia outside of the university. So one thing I want people to understand is that whatever the outcome is of this study, no hatred to any ethnic group or religious group. You know, as the scriptures say, love your neighbor as yourself. I believe in these principles. I encourage people who read and watch my content to do the same. Now, with that being said, the topic of Israel, or who is Israel, has grown quite a bit. A lot of people claim to be the descendants of the ancient Hebrews of Israel, from Europeans, Filipinos, Native Americans, Bantu, etc. One of these groups is correct. One of these groups is telling the truth, because all these groups can't be the descendants of the ancient Hebrews of Israel if we're looking in the sense of a direct bloodline. So the question is, who is correct? Who is telling the truth? Because that's what we want, is truth. We don't want to sin, because lying is sinning. We don't want to do that. So where can you find me when it comes to video platforms? You can find me on YouTube, BitChute, Daily Motion, DTube, Rumble, iConnect, FX, DLive, Brand New Tube, Twitch. So I'll just show you that. This is what my YouTube channel looks like. This is my BitChute. This is my Daily Motion. This is my DTube. This is my Rumble. This is iConnect FX. And this is DLive for streaming. This is Brand New Tube. This is Twitch for streaming as well. And where can you find me when it comes to social media platforms? Well, you can find me on Clubhouse, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And here's my Clubhouse account. And also have a club in Clubhouse called the Hebrew of Israel. And here's my Facebook profile. And here's my Facebook page. And here's another Facebook page. And here's my Instagram. And where can you find me when it comes to like websites? I have a Medium and a Quora. So here's my Medium. Here's my Quora. And where can you find me when it comes to like forums? So I have a Reddit, a Mastodon, Hebrew Sphere, and Men's Black Zone accounts. So there's my Reddit. There's my Hebrew Sphere. And this is Mastodon. And this is Black Men's Zone. And where can you support me if you like feel like you want to send some cash or whatever? I have a Patreon, PayPal, and a GoFundMe. So there's my Patreon. That's my PayPal, and that's my GoFundMe. Although I do think there's some issues with the GoFundMe, so I wouldn't use that. But anyways, so what is my goal? To conclude, again, my goal is to search for the descendants of the ancient Hebrews of Israel. But in order to do this, we need to reach into the past and learn about the origins of Semites, Israel, and the surrounding nations. So let's begin. Now I'm going to move on to the next PowerPoint. And by the way, I have so many different social medias because I know how YouTube is these days. I've learned a lot of people, get their information taken from them, their channels deleted. So I learned a thing or two and then decided to, have as many channels as possible. I also make a backup YouTube channel just in case.
One of your links to your one of your channels, it was brand new tube. What was it?
Yes, brand new tube. I'm actually going to need to go back in the future and download the links, and I'm going to put them in your comment section of your YouTube video. It's going to take a minute, but I'll do that sometime soon.
Okay.
For everything, as well as the sources that I'm going to use. I'm also going to go back in the future and grab every single source and try to put in the comment section.
Okay.
So that people can go back and get it. So let me prepare this. All right, here we go. Try to make sure it's there. All right. So here it is. This is part 1. This is from Shem to Israel. So who are the ancestors of Israel? In order to know who the ancient Hebrews of Israel are, we must understand who were their ancestors. According to the scriptures, the Israelites' ancestors are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob ancestors? Who were they? Who were the ancestors of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? According to the Hebrew text, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, ancient ancestors or ancestor was a man named Shem. And of course, here is the genealogy, Genesis 10 and Genesis 11. And it reads, "And the children were born also to Shem, and the father of all the children of Eber." And then skipping on down at verse 24, Arphaxad begot Shelah, and Shelah begot Eber. Now going over to Genesis 11, this is the genealogy of Shem. Shem was 101 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. After he begot Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters. So as you can see from verse 10 all the way to 26, you have Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serg, Nahor. Now Terah lived 70 years and begot Abraham. So we know according to the scriptures that Abraham, who's the ancestor of the Israelites, a patriarch of the Israelites, goes all the way back to Shem. And again, also even in the New Testament, it's confirmed that, again, the Israelites, and specifically dealing with the lineage of Jesus or Yahushua, he also leads back to Shem, as you can see. And here's just a visual representation of the Israelites going back to Jacob, going back to Isaac, going back to Abraham, then from Abraham all the way to Shem. And this is very important. What are the Israelites' ethnicity? The Israelites are a Semitic people because biblically they descend from Shem. And here's just a little bit of information on the Israelites when it comes to academia. The Israelites were a confederation of Iron Age Semitic speaking tribes of the ancient Near East, Hebrews. Hebrew people are mostly taken as synonymous with the Semitic speaking Israelites. So what is a Semite? Semite, member of a people speaking any of a group of related languages, presumably derived from a common language, Semitic. So what are Israelites linguistically? Historically, Israelites spoke a Semitic language called Hebrew. Paleo-Hebrew script is the name used by modern scholars to describe the script found in Canaanite inscriptions from the region of biblical Israel and Judea. Now, Proto-Sinaitic, the North Semitic alphabet, is considered the earliest trace of alphabetic writing and the common ancestor of both the ancient South Arabian script and the Phoenician script, which led to many modern alphabets, including the Greek alphabet. And here is just a representation of the beginning of these scripts, beginning with the Egyptian hieroglyphics to Proto-Sinaitic, all the way down to the Phoenician alphabet, Paleo-Hebrew, ancient South Arabian script, ancient North Arabian script, and even to Ge'ez, the Ethiopian languages. Here's also another representation of how the genealogy of the language script. Here's a good visual representation beginning from the Proto-Semitic all the way down to West Semitic to Central Semitic to Northwest Semitic to Canaanite to Paleo-Hebrew. So, what are Israelites? Israelites are ethnically a Semitic people because they descend from Shem. Israelites are linguistically Semitic because they descend from Shem. The ancestors of the Israelites are Semites. That's something we can probably all agree on when we put all this information together. So Semitic. One important factor about the Semitic languages is that it's part of the Afro-Asiatic family of languages. So here is a representation of this Afro-Asiatic of relating to or being a family of languages widely distributed over Southwestern Asia and Africa, including the Semitic. And then Semitic of relating to or consisting of subfamily of the Afro-Asiatic language family that includes Hebrew as well as other languages. So Afro-Asiatic languages, what is it? Afro-Asiatic languages, also called Afrosan languages, formerly Hemito-Semitic, Semito-Hamitic languages of common origin found in the northern part of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and some islands and adjacent areas in Western Asia. So here's a map of Afro-Asiatic languages stretching all the way from Mauritania in northwestern Africa, all the way to Iraq in the Middle East, all the way down to Ethiopia and sub-Saharan Eastern Africa. So Semitic and Afro-Asiatic. With that being said, Israelites are Afro-Asiatic Semitic people. Therefore, we should look into the origins of Semitic and Afro-Asiatic. First, we'll take an academic approach to the origin and the birthplace of Semitic and Afro-Asiatic. Then we'll take a biblical. But since we're taking an academic approach, we'll dive deep into genetics as well. The main genetic term you'll need to understand is a haplogroup. So what is a haplogroup? Here's a video that will go over some of it.
When it comes to human genetics, perhaps the best way to determine hypodescent or common ancestry in individuals and population.
By the way, is that loud enough for everyone? I'm trying to make sure.
It can be heard. It's just low.
Okay.
When it comes to human genetics, perhaps the best way to determine hypodescent or common ancestry in individuals and population clusters is through a specific genetic marker known as a haplogroup. Haplogroups are a common way for geneticists, archaeologists, and historians to make conclusions over the origins, exchange, and evolution of people.
Yeah, I don't know why you can't see that. It's a bit of a problem. Hold on.
When it comes to human genetics, perhaps.
Let me try it this way.
When it comes to human genetics, perhaps the best way to determine.
Yeah, it's not what I wanted.
When it comes to human genetics.
All right, y'all have to just listen to that instead of see the visual representation, but still good. Still good to hear.
Is it on YouTube?
Yes, actually.
Give me the title. I can just share it real quick for you.
It's called What is a Haplogroup by Massaman.
What is a haplogroup? By who?
Massaman. Massaman.
Okay, I got it.
And there's a certain marker you can start at.
What time marker?
Here, let me see. Are you going to flip to your screen, and then maybe you can skim through the lining, and I can see exactly where.
I got you. Here you go.
All right, let me see.
President of the United States and author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson.
Go back a little bit, right there where it shows up. Yeah, right there. That's
way
good.
to determine hypodescent or common ancestry in individuals and population clusters.
Oh, the video is just low.
Genetic marker known as a haplogroup. Haplogroups are a common way for geneticists, archaeologists, and historians to make conclusions over the origins, exchange, and evolution of people groups all over the world. And you may have heard me mention them in videos from time to time for the past year, but unless you knew beforehand, information on haplogroups may just cause confusion and misinformation for many viewers. Therefore, I've created this video to better give an understanding of how haplogroups relate to genetics, race, ethnicity, community, and other aspects of humanity that paint such a beautiful picture of the history and diversity of our planet. For as long as can be traced back, all females carry a maternal haplogroup inherited from their mother, while males carry both a maternal and paternal haplogroup, seeing how men have an X and Y chromosome. The paternal haplogroup inherited by the father is known as the Y haplogroup from the Y chromosome, while the maternal haplogroup is inherited from mitochondrial DNA and is thus referred to as the mtDNA. Because of historical patterns of migration and the nature of male-female relationships for most of human history, generally speaking, paternal haplogroups are better studied, understood, and mapped out, although this doesn't make maternal lineage irrelevant or any less interesting. For this reason, haplogroups will only survive to the next generation if they're passed on to their offspring of the same sex through the X or Y chromosomes. Now, you may not necessarily ever have an offspring that is the same gender as yourself, in which case your specific haplogroup would die with either you or your child, but at least one of your parents sure did, as with one of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and so on, back to the genesis of the human species. Barring genetic mutations,
and you can stop right there.
That you will share the same paternal haplogroup.
And we're about to get right into that part. So, going over what a haplogroup is now. All right, so he did a good basic breakdown of what a haplogroup is, but just in case you still don't quite understand what it is, here's from Living DNA. What are haplogroups? Living DNA explain. So, a haplogroup is a genetic population, a group of people who share a common ancestor on either their paternal or maternal line. Particular haplogroups are associated with well-known ancestral groups such as the Vikings, Australian Aborigines, and the Celts. Mitochondrial haplogroups are maternal haplogroups. Maternal haplogroups from the mother are determined by assessing mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA. This also means that you will have the same maternal haplogroup as everyone else in your direct maternal line. Your mother, brother, sister, aunt, and grandmother on your mother's side follow that haplogroup back to its origins, and you'll find a single mutation occurred at some point in history. So, paternal haplogroups. The paternal haplogroup relates to your Y chromosome, and since that is the sex determining chromosome for men, it is passed down from father to son, as women don't have a Y chromosome. They will not have a paternal haplogroup by default. However, they are able to find out what their paternal haplogroup is if a male relative from the father's side, ideally a brother, father, uncle, or grandfather, is also tested. So to sum that up, women can pass their mitochondrial DNA down from mother to daughter, mother to daughter, mother to daughter, going all the way back to really the genesis of women, mitochondrial Eve, and men carry their Y DNA, but they can also carry the maternal DNA as well. And men carry the Y DNA down from father to son, father to son, father to son, going all the way back to Y DNA Adam. So I just sort of explained all that so I can go on to the next one. So here's like a good visual representation. A haplogroup is a genetic population, a group of people who share a common ancestor on the patry line or the metry line. And so this is you, and you're going all the way back to your father and your paternal grandfather, and then this is your mother's lineage that's in you. This would be if you were like a male, as an example. And here's another example. The son having both the mother's mitochondrial DNA and the daughter having the mitochondrial DNA. And here's an example of the son carrying the father's mitochondrial DNA, but the daughter doesn't carry it. Here's another example down here. The father's in blue and the mother's in red. So when the father and the mother come together, the son can bear both Y DNA and the mitochondrial DNA, whereas the sister can only have the mother's mitochondrial DNA. All right, so what is a haplogroup? Also, haplogroups can be used to trace migrations, common descent, and ethnic origins. As an example, what is a haplogroup and what can it tell you about your family tree? At its essence, a haplogroup is an ancestral clan. Some clans are the Vikings, Native Americans, all tribes, Celts, Aboriginal Australians, and other such groups. Your haplogroup can tell you where your ancestors came from deep back in time. There are also male and female haplogroups, so you can see where your male and female side of the family originated back in prehistoric times. As with Y DNA, which traces the male line from father to son, and MT DNA, which traces the female line from mother to daughter. Haplogroups also follow straight male and female descendancy lines. Here's actually a good representation of a Y DNA of men of Europe. You tend to find a lot of Western Europeans with R1b and Eastern Europeans with R1a. People in the Balkans with I1A, and people in Scandinavia with I1, and people near the Finland with N1. So this is like a good visual representation that it really does fit populations of people groups. And here's just a world map of Y DNA haplogroups, like for instance, C being in Australia, Q being among Native Americans and people of that nature. So haplogroups. Linguists and geneticists commonly use haplogroups to find the genetic and linguistic origin and migration of ancient ethnic populations. This is why it's important to know about haplogroups when studying the origins of Semitic and Afro-Asiatic. With that being said, let's begin. All right, the origins of Afro-Asiatic Semitic people. What are the genetic, linguistic, and ethnic origins of Semitic and Afro-Asiatic people? The Horn of Africa. One of the theories for the origins of Semites and Afro-Asiatic is the Horn of Africa. So Lionel Bernard in 1997 proposed a scenario upon linguistic grounds wherein Semitic languages originated in Ethiopia and crossed the Red Sea. And so here is an actual map of how this would have occurred. The root of Proto-Semites being in the region of Ethiopia, crossing the Red Sea, both south of the Red Sea and north of the Red Sea, perhaps going through Sinai. And here's another representation of the homeland of Afro-Asiatic being in the Horn of Africa, crossing across the Red Sea and even going north into Egypt and also crossing through Sinai with Semitic not far from it. All right, so here's a paper that y'all can read that deals with Afro-Asiatic Semitic and haplogroup E. It says this extensive, well-grounded linguistic research places the Afroasiatic homeland in the southeastern Sahara or adjacent Horn of Africa. Dinkoff does revise his common Semitic homeland, moving it from solely within northeastern Africa to areas straddling the Delta and Sinai, but continues to place the other 5 branches origins wholly in Africa. Archaeological data suggests a pre-food producing population movement from Africa into the Levant consists with the linguistic arguments for a pre-Neolithic migration of pre-Proto-Semitic speakers out of Africa via Sinai. Again, here's the map. So, a critical reading of the data in genetic analysis, specifically those of Y chromosomes, the phylographical and the TAC1 94AF haplotypes, supports the hypothesis of populations moving from the Horn or southeastern Sahara northward to the Nile Valley, northwest Africa, the Levant, and Aegean. The geography of the M35/215 lineages, which is of Horn/East African origin, is largely concordated with the range of Afroasiatic. So basically what he's saying is that haplogroup E and Afroasiatic would have migrated from the Horn of Africa into places like the Middle East and North Africa. So he links haplogroup E and Afroasiatic together, as well as pre-Proto-Semitic. Here's a paper that y'all should check out as well that deals with Afroasiatic and haplogroup E. So using Ehret's scenario, E-M35 and Afroasiatic must have been together from the first dispersals out of the general area of the Horn of Africa. A large number of E-M35 lineages came north to Egypt, which is where E-M78, for example, is thought to have come into existence. E-M123, for example, is a clade of E-M35, which probably originated in the southern Levant, just to the northeast of Egypt. Many branches of E-M78 from nearby northern Egypt are also present in the Semitic-speaking populations of this region. So, and this is a third scenario. As a final scenario, we compare the genetic evidence to a thesis intended to represent the possibility that Afroasiatic and Semitic are younger than they are in the well-known proposals of Ehret and Miltalvi. If the starting point for Afroasiatic would be anywhere within the corridor stretching from the Nile Delta to the Horn of Africa, and if its dispersal started well within the Heliocene, more recently than in the scenarios of Ehret and Miltalvi, then E-M35 is also certain to have been present in that Proto-Semitic, Proto-Afroasiatic population, while E-M123 has its presence of being a subclade of E-M35 that may have originated in the Levant quite early. It is still basically true that the E-M35 diversity found in the Levant today is a branch of the same diversity found in Egypt, which also has a high E-M123 diversity. This would make Afroasiatic and probably also E-M35 both representatives of the African contribution to the full development of the Neolithic, but not necessarily playing any special early role in the pre-Neolithic. And so basically summing this paper is that Afroasiatic would have dispersed from the Horn of Africa along with E lineages to Egypt and into the Levant, and they still would have been carrying E. So the Horn of Africa, Afroasiatic origins, basically one of the theories for the origins of Afroasiatic and Semites is that it came from the Horn of Africa and they would have carried E. That's basically what that's saying. Here's a good representation of the homeland of Afroasiatic and Proto-Semites. And here's actually a good representation, or one representation, of haplogroup E going basically the same route as what many linguists and geneticists believe. So I don't believe this is a coincidence. And here's actually the dispersal of E-M35 into the Horn of Africa, North Africa, the Arabia, and even to Europe. And here's another representation of the migration of Proto-Afroasiatic from the Horn of Africa into Ethiopia, going up the Nile and splitting into the Middle East or into North Africa. And here's also another representation of the various ancient E clades we find, such as in the Levant, Mesopotamia, South Arabia, near Yemen, Horn of Africa, Northwest Africa, North Africa, and of course in Egypt and the Mediterranean. So how would these Afroasiatic and Semites look? Since we're dealing with ancient populations, these early Proto-Afroasiatics and pre-Proto-Semites would have looked like Proto-Ethiopid if they're coming from the Horn of Africa. So here's probably a good example of what these Proto-Afroasiatics would look like when migrating throughout Africa and the Middle East. So this is the Proto-Ethiopid, and over here's the description. The ancient type that inhabited the southwest Eritrean lowlands prior to the arrival of Ethiopians and possibly resembles early out of Africa types, was still common in Kenya to Sudan during historic times. So this is like an out of African type. And their traits are dark skin, basically, dark, sometimes medium brown skin, and kinky curly hair, dolichocephalic with robust, bony, and elongated faces. Prognathism, which means the protruding of the jaw, is relatively pronounced. And here's the various biologists that came up with this type. Here's also another type. If y'all remember in the study, it talked about pre-Neolithic populations as well, the Proto-Afroasiatic people being pre-Neolithic. And that means that if they were pre-Neolithic, they probably would have looked like the Omotic type. And here's the description, probably a relic of the pre-Neolithic periods. Physical traits, dark brown skin and kinky curly hair, usually dolichocephalic, mild Pitzrayim nose, which means the nose is wide, basically. The lips are full and cheekbones often prominent. Again, here's the literature you can read on them. And this is the same region that Proto-Afroasiatics are coming out of, including Semites. So ultimately, these early Afroasiatics and Semites would have looked Ethiopic or African if their origins truly are from the Horn of Africa. Here's Ethiopic with reddish, narrow, high nose, slim stature, and long heads and faces, marked chin, thick lips. Besides affinity, other sub-Saharan Africa are linked to early Caucasoid who partially left and migrated back to Africa. And that's one thing that should be understood, is that when it comes to Caucasoid, it's really more of a skull type. There are such thing as dark-skinned, quote-unquote, Caucasoid people. Don't really use these descriptors today, but it is believed that this was once outside of the African continent. So a new type phenotype that these early Proto-Afro people and Proto-Semites could have looked like is a East Ethiopic type. Ethiopic proper, showing that most pronounced Ethiopic characters of all common around the Horn of Africa in its purest form in inland areas of Somalia and Ethiopia. They have dark reddish brown skin, tightly to curly to tightly, and their dolls are found. So the ancestors of the Israelites could from the Horn of Africa, where early African and Semitic population created from, could have carried YD group E, would have looked Proto-Ethiopic. And here's everything put together. You can see how the group E spread of Proto-Afro-Asiatic and what these people probably times. So another theory for the origins of Semites and Afro is actually in Yemen. The Horn of Africa isn't a theory. Let's begin with Yemen. So here's a good map showing Semites or the Semites coming and landing in Yemen, and then eventually go northward. So this is from Peter Solomon. He is a and a linguist, and so my theory is that when the Proto-Semitic language left the Afroasiatic homeland, East Africa, one lineage left, but Proto from this region included all the wide Haplogroups then present in Northeast Africa. And he says, West Semitic.
Hey, you're going in and out.
Into Africa.
Can you hear me?
Oh, what you? I can hear you.
You're going in and out.
Am I?
You're still doing.
My bad.
Yeah, it's like every other word you're going in and out. Yeah. See, the audience is saying you're in the Matrix. So we'll wait for them to get that audio back up and running. But as you can see, the brother is delivering, man. Very powerful information. He's giving you pretty much building it up from the ground up. He's pouring the cement, letting it dry for you guys and give you a strong foundation and understanding of where he's coming from with the origin of the Semitic people. He gave you proto Semites, the Ethiopoids, of however you say it or pronounce it, and how they would look, and how scientists reconstruct their facial features and what part of the world they would have came from, and the diffusion of those the Ethiopid. Yeah, thank you, brother TB at ET. Thank you. So the brother's giving you some great information also about the haplogroups, E1B1B, traveling along with the Afro-Asiatic languages as well. So stay tuned. He's going to drop even more pertinent information on you guys. Just having a few audio issues here, but he'll be right back to pick up where he left off. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Plenty more videos like this to come in the future. Are you ready, Hebrew and Israel?
Can you hear me now? Am I good? Or?
Yeah, you're clear.
Yes, I think I'm all right. I'm going to get a swallow of water. All right.
Hit the like button,
So I'm starting from the top sentence, and we're still Peter again. He's as you can see, all his credentials right here. Link. Anyways, he said it is possible that North Hebrew people dispersed into Northeast Africa's now region around 5000 BCE. Thus, the earliest out of Africa
settlement of Proto-Semitic people was likely in Yemen, on the southeastern region of the Arabian Peninsula. They then spread to the east and northeast to enter Mesopotamia, and found the Semitic kingdom of Akkad or Akkad and the Akkadian Empire. And then he says, in this group, many of us conclude that haplogroup E is one of the major founding haplogroups of the Semitic people, and that haplogroup E people are the ones who brought Proto-Semitic languages out of the Afroasiatic homeland in Northeast Africa into the Levant and Mesopotamia. So he believes as well, Peter Solomon also believes that Proto-Semites would have had haplogroup E. This is very important because we have two, well, really, we technically have three geneticists and linguists saying that Proto-Afroasiatics and Proto-Semites had E, either carrying it from the Horn of Africa, and this guy believes that it's Yemen. So two different origin points. So again, we're met with the idea that haplogroup E being the founding lineage of Afroasiatic and Semitic people. But if Yemen was the birthplace of Afroasiatics and Semites, then what would these early Afroasiatics and Semites look like? So now we're getting into phenotype. What would these guys look like? So here's a book from African Presence in Early Asia. The Encyclopedia Britannia gives a description of the physical qualities of the original Arabs. The inhabitants of Yemen, Hyderabad, Oman, and the adjoining districts in the shape of the heat, color, length, and slenderness of the limbs and scantiness of the hair point to an African origin. They claim descent of Qahtan. I'll get into him later. These Yemenite kings descend from Qahtan and Hamir, the Dusky, a name denoting African origin. The general characteristics of the institutions of Yemen bore considerable resemblance to the neighboring ones of the Nile Valley. So basically, they're saying that a lot of the early inhabitants of Yemen sort of look like Nile Valley people, Africans, should I say. And here's a book, a good source when it comes to the early population of Arabia, what they look like. It says, the people of Arabia belong to two distinct and apparently quite distinct races. The Arabs of the south are smaller, darker, coarser featured, and nearly beardless. All authorities agree that the southern Arabs are nearly related by origin to the Abyssinians. And by the way, Abyssinians are a Semitic-speaking population in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and a lot of them have origins of being Semitic, but of course they are because they speak a Semitic language. Give me a quick second. Let me refresh something. All right. So here's another good book talking about the racial types of South Arabia. It says racial affinities to the South Arab lies in Northeast Africa. A Negroid strain occurs in the belt of Africa through South Arabia to Malaysia, including the Dravidians of southern India. So again, they're saying that South Arabs seem to look like Northeastern African people. So ancient Yemeni seems to have physically looked like African or Dravidian, specifically peoples of Northeastern Africa. So here's probably a good example. It's called the North Ethiopic. Common along the Red Sea coast and the Nile River and the Nile Valley from Egypt to Eritrea and deep into the Ethiopian highlands, often blended with Arabids and Yemenids that arrived in prehistoric times, and sometimes in Arabia as well. And their physical traits is dark, sometimes medium, brown skin, tight, curly hair. And as you can see on the map, it's in eastern northeastern Africa, but also in Arabia. This type, this physical type that once existed in prehistoric times. Here's another type, the Arab Vidoid, ancient Vidic-like type of the Arabian Peninsula, found in Materi of South Oman around the Hadramawt in Yemen. This type could be linked to the ancient Arabian population as well as the Dravidians of India. Physical type, dark brown skin, curly ringlet, black hair, as an example. And as you can see the map down here of what this type would look like. So even in the 1930s to present day, people of Yemen still are quite dark skinned. So here's some good examples of some Yemenid types who could go all the way back, to the Proto-Semitic type and the original inhabitants of Yemen. These photos were taken in the 1930s by various travelers, and they're really quite good. And here's, of course, modern Yemeni people with very, very dark skin tones, medium brown to dark brown. Again, this is what Proto-Semites could have looked like. But anyways, this means if we were to go back, this means if you were to go back long before today or the 1930s, or even ancient Yemeni people, if you went back to the birth of the Proto-Afro-Asiatic people in Yemen, then logically they too would be very dark-skinned and African-looking if you were to go all the way back to like the Neolithic period. Anyways, conclusion. The early Afro-Asiatic Semitic ancestors of the Israelites could have emerged from Yemen. Genotype, they would have carried Y DNA haplogroup E. Phenotype-wise, they would have looked Northeastern African or Dravidian. So here's all the information that I said put together, the migration of Semites in Yemen, Peter Solomon's quote on what he believes Proto-Semitics came from, the description of ancient Yemeni people, and then a good representation. So another theory for the origin of Semites and Afro-Asiatic is the Arabian Peninsula. So let's begin there. So the Wickler-Catani theory, named after its two most distinguished prominents, Hugo Wickler and Leon Catani, claims that Arabia was originally a land of great fertility and the first home of the Semitic peoples. Through the millennia, it was undergoing a process of steadily desertification, a drying up of wealth and waterways, and spread of the desert at the expense of the cultivatable land. The declining productivity of the peninsula, together with the increase in the number of inhabitants, led to a series of crises of overpopulation and consequently to the recurring cycle of invasions of the neighboring countries by the Semitic peoples in the peninsula. And basically, this theory is that a bunch of Semites, Proto-Semites, once were in Arabia, and just so much was going on from the drying of Arabia to overpopulation. They eventually went northward into the Levant, Mesopotamia, and even southward into Yemen and Eastern Africa. So what's interesting about the Arabian Peninsula being one of the believed origins for Semitic people is that haplogroup E may have originated in this location as well. One of the origins for haplogroup E is the Arabian Peninsula, which ties well with the idea that Afro-Asiatic and haplogroup E are one link. So here's from a paper from 23andMe. And they're on the 23andMe website, they say it's possible that the men carrying the DE haplogroup journeyed from Africa, crossed the Red Sea and into the Arabian Peninsula. But it's also possible that DE originated within the Arabian Peninsula itself and later spread back into Africa. And there is a common theory that DE originated out of Africa. Here's another paper that goes into haplogroup E being in Arabia. It says a geographical distribution of the sub-Saharan African lineages in the Arabian Peninsula seems to indicate a prehistoric entrance of a notable portion of these lineages that participated in the building of the primitive Arabian population. Basically, the primitive Arabian population may have been sub-Saharan African in type. The presence of two underderived E-M96 Saudi lineages raise interesting questions related to the microhaplogroup DE-YAP of phylograph. Regions near but external to Northeast Africa, like the Levant or Southern Arabian Peninsula, could have served as an encapsulator for the early diversification of non-African unpaternal haplogroup varieties like Y chromosome DE dash Y or YAP. This model would imply that both CF-P143 and the DE-YAP evolved nearby but outside Africa. One DE-YAP ancestor would have spread to Asia and evolved to the haplogroup D, while another DE-YAP returned to Northeastern Africa and evolved into E. So basically, this paper is saying that we found very ancient clades of haplogroup E-M96, and that it's likely that DE either originated outside of Africa in the Arabian Peninsula and migrated in, or that it originated close in Africa and came out but back into Africa, basically like a back to Africa migration. But it seems to imply that Arabia was where E and DE originated from. Here's another paper as well. It says the split of the Y chromosomes composites DE haplogroup is very similar to the age of MT DNA L3, and Eurasian origin and back migration to Africa has been proposed for the African Y chromosome haplogroup E. This correlation rather seems to be the result of a joint and global replacement of old autochthonous males. Autochthonous males, indigenous males, and female African lineages by new Eurasian incomers. Basically, they're saying that E is likely a Eurasian new incomer that came into Africa, and that they really replaced the indigenous African population. And we'll get into them a bit later on. And still going on with this same particular paper, it says, curiously, ancestral E star, which means the most ancient form, ancestral E lineages have been detected in the Arabian Peninsula and in the Levant. So biologically, some Semites are, just going back to sum all this together, it seems to be that E could have likely originated in the Arabian Peninsula, which is interesting because this is also where Semites may have also originated from, if of course those two anthropologists are correct about Semites coming from the Arabian Peninsula. But anyways, biologically, some believe Semites come from Arabia, and that they would have looked like a brown Mediterranean type, also known as a Euro-African. So let's just go a bit into the biology. So physical anthropologists are certain that Mesopotamia was the eastern borderline for Semitic types of individuals, and that the Semites, whom we know as the brown Mediterranean peoples, who invaded Mesopotamia from Arabia. And so what is a brown Mediterranean? So particularly when we note once more that Mediterranean is not a synonym for white, Elliot Smith's brown or Mediterranean race being nearer the mark, Elliot Smith's class these Proto-Egyptians as a branch of what he calls the brown race, which is the same as Sergey's Mediterranean or Euro-African race. The term brown in this text refers to skin color and is simply a euphemism for Negro. And this is the actual paper that's dealing with the term Euro-African. It says the Mediterranean race was first defined by Sergey, who also calls it Euro-African. The Mediterranean race originated in Africa and is closely related to the Negro, both being long-skulled peoples descended from a common stock, the Euro-African. And this is actually Sergey's book, The Mediterranean Race. He says, the human species with cranial and facial characters thus well determined, I call Euro-African. And this because having had its origins in Africa. And so putting all that together, if Semites did come from the Arabian Peninsula and these anthropologists are describing them as being a brown African people, it would seem like that these early Semites would have sort of looked like an African type. So therefore, the Semites who come from the Arabian Peninsula, kind of actually already said that. As a matter of fact, though, going into this a little bit deeper, it is believed that the population of ancient Arabia had a Proto-Negroid strain to it. This is from the book called The Arabs. It says the original inhabitants of Arabia then, according to Sir Arthur Keith, one of the world's greatest living anthropologists, who has made a study of Arab skeletal remains, ancient and modern, were not the familiar Arabs of our own time, but a very much darker people. A proto-Negroid belt of mankind stretched across the ancient world from Africa to Malay, giving rise to the Semitic peoples of Africa, to the Dravidian peoples of India, and to the intermediate dark people inhabiting the Arabian Peninsula. In the course of time, two big migrations of fair-skinned peoples came from the north. One of them, the Mongoloids, to break through and transform the dark belt of man beyond India. The other, the Caucasoids, to drive a wedge between India and Africa. Keep that quote in mind later on in the future presentations. Anyways, the more vile invaders overcame the dark-skinned peoples, absorbing most of them, driving them southward, where my own explorations is believed to have discovered vestiges of them in the natural sanctity beyond the great sandy sea of the Rub al Khatel. So keep these last two sentences in mind. Also, another book that talks about the ancient inhabitants of Arabia says it is quite conceivable that the great peninsula of Arabia was once populated as far as its natural conditions allowed by a primitive Negroid stock, who may have been later on particularly exterminated by changing and unfavorable conditions of climate and by the aftercoming of the white man and his type. So anyways, genetically speaking, this does seem to be the case that you once had a stock of people in the Arabian Peninsula, but that stock has dwindled in number, that there was, like, I wouldn't use the word primitive, but a more ancient Negro or African type. Even we can see this when it comes to the genetic papers. Remember, it says that these sub-Saharan African lineages in the Arabian Peninsula seem to indicate a prehistoric entrance of a notable portion of these lineages that participated in the building of the primitive Arabian population. The presence of two underived E-M96 Saudi lineages raises interesting questions related to the micro haplogroup DE-YAP phylogeny. So it does seem that today, genetically, we are able to prove that there was like a primitive Arabian stock that was very, in a sense, similar to sub-Saharan African lineages. So these ancient, well, not ancient, these 19th century writers were correct according to modern DNA. Anyways, therefore, the Proto-Ethiopic phenotype would have probably be the best fit for these Semites if they're originating in the Arabian Peninsula. Because as we know, the Proto-Ethiopic type is an early out of Africa type. So to conclude, the ancestors of the Israelites, Afro-Asiatic Semitic people, could have emerged from the Arabian Peninsula. Genotype-wise, they would have carried haplogroup E, and phenotype-wise, they would have looked like a brown Mediterranean or Euro-African. And here's all the information put together. The origin of them in Arabia, to the genetics of E originating in Arabia, to the ancient Arabian stock being different than today, and a good visual representation. So another theory for the origin of Semites and Afro-Asiatic is the Eastern Sahara, Nile Valley/Red Sea. So let's begin with there. So again, going back to this paper, it goes into the origins of Afro-Asiatic in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'll let Genesis 49ers take this as I get a sip of water.
All right. So Afro-Asiatic compared to EM35, there are several relatively uncontroversial proposals concerning the ancient movements of Afro-Asiatic languages, each of which we can immediately compare to haplogroup EM35 and its subclades in population genetics. Both EM35 male lineages on the one hand and Afro-Asiatic languages on the other are seen by specialists in the two respective fields as having moved prehistorically within what Cruciani et al. 2007 refers to as a bidirectional corridor along the Nile and or the western coast of the Red Sea.
All right. So from the Sinai, all right, so it says the Red Sea, from the Sinai and Mediterranean to the Horn of Africa. So also in both fields, the population who lived in the corridor has obvious ancient connections to the Near Eastern Levantine corridor spreading into the Fertile Crescent, where such clades as E-V13 and E-M34 may have their origins Middle Eastern Semitic speaking populations typically also have a smaller presence of E-M35 Eurasian lineages than most African populations of Afro-Asiatic speakers, with a apparent exception of Chadic. There is also in both cases an obvious connection to the west of the Nile in the direction of the Sahara and along the southern Mediterranean in the Maghreb. The people there are strongly associated with the distinct E-M81 and E-V65 sublineages of E-M35 and the Berber branch of the Afro-Asiatic languages. In both populations, genetics and linguists, genetics and linguists, the Levant branch re-entered Africa in historical periods, both in Egypt, which is now Arabic speaking, but was once home to the Egyptian language, and Ethiopia, where Semitic, South Semitic languages now dominate in some areas which are believed to have once been Kushite speaking. Indeed, there must have been much back and forth movement as these 2 points of contact between Africa and Asia. Of course, When we find such similar patterns in both languages and wide lineages, this can give us at least some confidence that the same population movements cause both patterns. With this in mind, it is proposed that we may at least assume a strong likelihood that E-M35 male lineages were involved in at least many of the migrations and cultural transmissions which caused the present and historical distributions of the Afroasiatic languages. So here's a good map showing the origin of Afro-San or Proto-Afroasiatic in the Nile Valley or the Eastern Sahara or the Red Sea. Here's just the region, the range, and here's even like a DNA representation, the origin of E-M78 being right here, Proto or Afroasiatic homeland of Proto-Semitic languages. And they would eventually came into the Middle East. So it says in this book that the overall pattern is consistent with a model of the first speakers of Afroasiatic having emerged in or near the Horn of Africa or the Nile Valley. Early pre-Proto-Semitic speakers would have migrated into Syrio-Palestine before the Neolithic, being taken by their M35 bearers, specifically M35/78, and adopted by populations bearing M89 lineages. Keep this in mind. We'll go into this much later, but basically he's saying that the pre-Proto-Semitic people would have carried haplogroup E, and that another people, well, they're going to adopt something later on, but we'll get into that later. So here's another good representation of the origins of Afroasiatic being near the Red Sea. And then again, here's a good representation of E migrating. So you do see like an overlap of this migration of Afroasiatic and haplogroup E. It's perfectly matches each other. So here's actually a genetic paper that deals with haplogroup E and Afroasiatic. So it says most Y chromosome haplogroup diversity in Africa, however, is present within micro haplogroup E that seem to have appeared 21,000 through 32,000 YBP, somewhere between the Red Sea and Lake Chad. The Proto-Afroasiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups, including current speakers of the Afroasiatic languages and pastoralist populations. So E-P2 seems to be the father of Proto-Afroasiatic. Here's E-P2, and here's all of its belt. It includes, for instance, EM123. It includes E2, also known as E1B1A, and it includes, well, basically everything you see under here. It includes basically E1B1B and E1B1A. So the father of E1B1B and E1B1A is Proto-Afroasiatic. Anyways, going further on, it says the network analysis of the chromosomes carrying E haplogroups was robust enough with a main cluster near the root represented by the CUN compassing most of Eritreans and Sudanese populations, including Nilo-Saharan and Afroasiatic speakers, suggesting that linguistic divergence is either a subsequent event to the population divergence, language replacement, or to the two linguistic families may have shared a common origin. The Yemeni, Saudi Arabia, and Oman populations, on the other hand, form a Near Eastern group. The link between the Yemeni and Omani populations with Afar and Shayo populations from Eritrea could have attributed to the geographical proximity and possibility past genetic history. The Northern African populations tend to separate into two distinct groups, one containing Moroccan Arabs and Berbers and Sarahis, hard to say that. Derived from the larger Eastern African group, and the other includes the Northern African populations of Algeria, Egypt, and Tunisia, which forms a connection to both Europeans and Eritrean and Ethiopians, hinting to a recent genetic relationship between North and Eastern African populations, as is widely believed. The Shio and Afar populations of Eritrea tend to cluster with Near Eastern or Arabian populations, North African populations forming the fourth cluster. Interestingly, populations from Egypt, Tunisia, and Ethiopia, Ethiopian Jews, assumed an intermediate position between the East African and Near Eastern clusters. A branching of the network may once again represent an episode of human migration that carried the haplogroup E-M35 and its sub-haplogroups farther to the western coast of the Red Sea, to Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. Consequently, concurrently down the southern Africa, as part of a more recent Y chromosome motivated out of Africa migration episode. The PCA and MDS display similar interesting groupings of the Afar and Shio populations of Eritrea with their Near Eastern Arabian populations is conjure up upon the genetic relationship of the two sides of the Red Sea. The arrival of the E-M35 and derived subclades, for example, E-M123/E-M34 to Arabia, appears to be strongly linked to the expansion into Eastern Africa, North Africa, Europe, Southern Africa, an event that is likely related to pastoralism, hastened by its advent and admissible for analysis and dating using approaches similar to what was proposed for the co-migration of Y chromosome and disease traits. And so it says, although most of the data set in our study define the deep ancestry of the phylogeny.
You need me to read?
Yeah, the phenology. They still shed some information through our interpretations of the recent phenomena, such as the current genetic diversity of E haplogroup and an implication to the origin and spread of Afroasiatic languages and the history of pastoralism. Moreover, more comparative genetic analysis between the two sides of the Red Sea, especially emphasizing on E-M123/E-M34 or E-M78 haplogroups, will not only redefine the root of the exit of H. Homo sapiens sapiens from Eastern Africa, but also the genealogies of Afroasiatic languages in the region. So basically, what it's saying is that haplogroup E more than likely was on both sides of the Red Sea, spreading Afroasiatic languages as well as various subclades of haplogroup E. I wish there was a good map that showed that. But here's also another genetic paper that deals with Proto-Semitic. As you can see down here, it says B and E Proto-Semitic. And what it has for B is haplogroup E. And it has E, and it has the mitochondrial haplogroups H, M, and N. But again, it also has haplogroup E as being Proto-Semitic. And you see it basically coming out of the Red Sea, near the Red Sea region. And then here's just another representation of how this looks, or how this would have taken place. So here's a good paper. It says Red Sea Origins and Neolithic Expansion. It says haplogroup E1B1B, formerly known as E3B, represents the last major direct migration from Africa into Europe. E1B1B lineages are closely linked to the diffusion of Afroasiatic languages. So Afroasiatic languages are basically haplogroup E. And here's actually the various branches and basically the region of the Red Sea being the spread of haplogroup E. And of course, it's seen in Arabia. Some clades are only seen in Arabia, like V1700, and some clades are seen in both Arabia and Ethiopia. Some are seen in only North Africa and things of that nature. So when y'all get a chance, y'all can look into this tree. And here again is a good representation of Proto-Afroasiatic languages from the Red Sea, just going all throughout North Africa, East Africa, and the Middle East. And then here's another representation of haplogroup E and Proto-Afroasiatic coming from or originating near the Red Sea and going into places like Levant with Semites, North Africa, and East Africa. All right, so yet again, we're met with the idea that haplogroup E is the lineage of early Afroasiatic and Semitic populations, but this time the haplogroup would have originated near the Red Sea region of the Eastern Sahara. Now, how would these early Afroasiatic and Semites look? So I think I'll go again with the North Ethiopic type. I think that's a good type with these early Afroasiatics and Semites would look because it's in that region of the Red Sea. As you can see, it's heavily highlighted in yellow. And basically, they would have been like a dark-skinned looking people. All right, so to conclude, the ancestors of the Israelites, Afroasiatic Semitic people, could have emerged from the Eastern Sahara. They would have carried haplogroup E, and they would have looked like Eastern Saharans. And here's just all the information put together for a good visual representation. All right, so there's yet again another theory when it comes to the origin of Semites and Afroasiatics, this time being North Africa, or also known as the Sahara or the Sahel. So let's begin with the North African origins of Afroasiatics. So the Semitic family is a member of the larger Afroasiatic family, all of whose other 5 or more branches have their own origin in North Africa or the Maghreb. Largely for this reason, the ancestors of Proto-Semitic speakers were originally believed by some to have first arrived in the Middle East from North Africa, possibly as part of the operation of the Saharan pump around the late Neolithic. And here's a map of showing how Proto-Afroasiatics could have emerged in North Africa, Semites going to northeastern Africa near Egypt. And at one point, the Sahara was once green. It once had vegetation. And let's actually get into that. So the Sahara pump theory is a hypothesis that explains how fauna and flora, or flora and fauna, migrated between Eurasia and Africa via the land bridge in the Levant region. It posits that extended periods of ambient rainfall lasting many thousands of years in Africa are associated with the wet green Sahara phase, during which larger lakes and more rivers existed. And so here's actually rock art in the Sahara, in the desert region of the Sahara, that shows animals like giraffes and elephants once being there. And so here's actually a good representation of what the green Sahara, as well as the Arabia, would have looked at one point when it was all vegetation and rivers once flowed through it. So here's actually a good representation of haplogroup E coming out of the North African region. So it says Ricketts of 2008 associated the sub-Saharan African influences detected in the Tufian samples with the migration of E1B1B lineages from North Africa to the Levant and then into Europe. Recently, it has been proposed that E3B originated in sub-Saharan Africa and expanded into the Near East and Northern Africa at the end of the Pelicotone. It's hard to say. I gotta get this word right. What's that word? What's that word, man? I know that's dealing with
What line at? Where you at, brother?
the Paleocene. I think that's
The Pleistocene. Where you at?
Pleistocene. All right, the Pleistocene. Okay.
Pleistocene, yeah.
The Mesolithic population carrying group 3 lineages with the M35-M215 mutation expanded northward from sub-Saharan to North Africa and the Levant. So basically, this is yet another theory for haplogroup E originating in either like sub-Saharan Africa or North Africa and spreading with Proto-Afro-Asiatic peoples, including Semites, into neighboring regions of the Levant. And so here's also another paper dealing with the origins of Afro-Asiatic. Greenberg, 1971, noted that 4 of the 5 members of his Afro-Asiatic language phylum are located on the African continent, and only one mainly in the southwestern Asia. Therefore, he saw the mother language from which they descended as being in northeastern Africa. And so here's actually a good book that deals with the origin of Proto-Semitic and Proto-Afro-Asiatic. Here's a good branch and tree that shows it. It says the 5 branches of Afro-Asiatic are not really parallel to each other because closer relations can be established between some of them. And so it says right here, this implies that the speakers of Proto-Semitic were still dwelling in Africa in the 5th millennium BC in the Neolithic Pluvial, which was 5,500 through 3,500 BC, when the Sahara's climate was much wetter, so that erosion took place, as in other moist temperature in subtropical regions, and that there was a proper system of rivers and vegetation consisting of grass with trees. The worsening of environmental conditions is indicated in North Africa during 3,500 BC with disappearance of vegetation, a major funnel break, desertification, and desertion. This might have been the period with the speakers of Proto-Semites passed through the Nile Delta from the west to the east and reached Western Asia, where written documents of the 3rd millennium BC preserve notable traces of pre-Semitic and in Mesopotamia, also the pre-Sumerian substream. Thus, from North Africa, wave after wave of Semites migrations would have seemed to set forth. The earliest of these migrants and those who went furthest to the east were the Akkadians, who journeyed along the Fertile Crescent through Palestine and Syria and crossing over into Mesopotamia, reached northern Babylonia during 3000 BC and founded the first Semitic empire at Kish. The southern Semites would have had to reach the moist highlands of Yemen and the Hadrit after 2000 BC, following the collapse of the early Bronze Age culture in Palestine, while the Ethiopians would have crossed over to the Horn of Africa when drier conditions prevailed in South Arabia, 1500 through 500 BC. The Lycio Berbers continued instead to occupy the original language area of the speakers of Afro-Asiatic. Their African origins may even be confirmed by a relationship of Afro-Asiatic and Bantu languages, which form a single group of the larger Niger-Congo family. It's very interesting. Niger-Congo could be Afro-Asiatic. Now, anyways, it says down here, actually that goes into phenotype. I'm not going to get into that yet. So here's a good visual representation again of Proto-Afro-Asiatic coming out of North Africa during the Green Sahara period. All right. So here's another paper dealing with the origins of Afroasiatic. It says this extensive, well-grounded linguistic research places the Afroasiatic homeland in the southeastern Sahara or adjacent Horn of Africa. And when all the Afroasiatic branches are included, strongly indicate a pre-food producing Proto-Afroasiatic economy. A careful reading of Dinkoff shows his continuing adherence to his long-held position of an exclusively African origin for the family. He exquisitely describes Proto-Afroasiatic vocabulary as consists with non-food producing vocabulary and links it to the pre-Neolithic cultures in the Levant and in Africa south of Egypt, noting the latter to be older. Dinkoff does revise his location for the common Semitic homeland, moving it from entirely within Northeast Africa to areas straddling the Nile Delta and Sinai, but continues to place the origins of the 5 other branches of the Afroasiatic family wholly in Africa. One interpretation of the archaeological data supports a pre-food producing population movement from Africa into the Levant, consistent with the linguistic arguments for a pre-Neolithic migration of pre-Proto-Semitic speakers out of Africa via Sinai. All right, furthermore, the archaeological of Northern Africa does not support the genomic diffusion of farming populations from the Near East. From this continuity, it has been argued that the pre-food production of Caspian peoples spoke languages ancestral to the Berber or Chadic branches of Afroasiatic, placing the Proto-Afroasiatic period distinctly before 10,000 BC. Furthermore, there is evidence that cattle domestication occurred independently in the early Heliocene, Eastern Sahara, earlier than in the Near East, casting doubt on the idea of a central origin of pre-production in the Levant. So, a quick reading of the genetic data analysis, specifically those of the Y chromosome physiograph and the TAQI 49 AF haplotypes, supports a hypothesis of populations moving from the Horn or southeastern Sahara northward to the Nile Valley, northwest Africa, and Levant and Aegean. The geography of the M35/215 lineages, which is of Horn/East African origin, is largely concordinated with the range of Afroasiatic languages. Underhill state that these lineages was carried by Africa during the Mesolithic. The distributions of the Afroasiatic branches and its lineages can be best explained by invoking movements that originated in Africa and occurred before the emergence of food production, as well as after. So basically, summing all this together, various linguists and geneticists believe that Proto-Afroasiatic would have originated in northern Africa, including Semites, and that they would have migrated from North Africa through Sinai into the Levant and then into Mesopotamia, in which we can actually see with DNA when it comes to haplogroup E specifically. So let's actually go into that. This paper actually deals with it. It says the expansion of the Neolithic farmers from the Middle East into Europe is also represented in the worldwide data, although suggesting a relatively localized area of impact, as mentioned before in the relation to African NRY history, a Mesolithic population carrying group 3 lineages with the M35/M215 mutation expanded northward from sub-Saharan to North Africa and the Levant. The Levantine populations of farmers that dispersed into Europe during and after the Neolithic carried these African group 3 M35/M215 lineages. Group 3 lineages are found at high frequencies in Africa and relatively high frequencies in the Middle East and Southern Europe, characterized by the M35/M215 mutations, with occasional occurrences in Central Asia, Pakistan, and America. Most notably, the PN2 transition unites 2 high-frequency subclades defined by M2, which is UMB1A, PN1, M180 mutations in sub-Saharan Africa, and M35/M215 in North and Eastern Africa and Mediterranean Basin and Europe. We suggest that the population with this subclade of the African YAP M145, M203, PN2 cluster expanded into the southern and eastern Mediterranean at the end of the Paleocene. These lineages would have been introduced then from the Middle East into Southern Europe and to the lesser extent Northern India and Pakistan by farmers during the Neolithic expansion. Now, so here's like a map, one of many maps when it comes to E-96, basically being all throughout Africa, the Middle East, Europe, all the way to India. So overall, again and again, we're saying that Haplogroup E is the best candidate for the lineage of early Afroasiatic and Semitic populations. One of the top 3 beliefs for the origins of Afroasiatic, including Semites, is that they emerged from North Africa and carried Haplogroup E. What would these Afroasiatic and Semites look like? So I'll let Genesis 49ers take on the first side of the page, the left side. I'll get a sip of water.
All right. So, said what bones can tell biological perspectives on the hunter-gatherers of the Maghreb. Mack told these were a skeletally robust people and definitely African in origin. Dental morphology does suggest connections with latter Africans, including those responsible for the Caspian industry, Irish 2000, and early mid-Holocene human remains from the western half of the Sahara, something that points to the Maghreb as one of the regions from which people recolonized the desert. Another form of body modification was much more widespread and indeed a distinctive feature of the Ibero-Maurusian skeletal sample as a whole. This was the practice of removing 2 or more of the upper incisors, usually around puberty and from both males and females, something that probably served as both the passage and ethnic marker, just as does parts of the sub-Saharan Africa today. You want me to read the right side too?
I got that. Unless you want to just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I'll read it for you. It says the Trans-Saharan craniometry, principal component analysis of craniometric variables, closely allies the early Holocene occupants at Gobero, who were buried with Kiphian material culture, with late Pleistocene to mid-Holocene humans from the Maghreb and southern Sahara, referred to as Ibero-Maurusians, Capsians, and Matodes.
And basically what this paper is saying is that these ancient and early North African populations of the Neolithic period would have looked African. And actually, I just read this, so I'm just skip that. So since we're dealing with the Neolithic Green Sahara period, here's the best phenotype of what early Afro-Asiatic and Semitic people look like. And remember, it is believed that, thus from North Africa, wave after wave of Semitic migrations would seem to set forth. So this includes Semites. So I believe the Saharan Ethiopic type will be a good representation of these Proto-Semites and Proto-Afro-Asiatic people. It says over here that Ethiopic type was more common during the Neolithic when the Sahara was green. They have reddish brown to black skin, tight curly hair, and dolichocephalic and mesocephalic skull structure. And so these guys, this is what they would have looked like during the Green Sahara period, coming out of Africa into the Middle East. And here's another type, the West Ethiopia type. Here's another phenotype, how these early Proto-Afro-Asiatic people would have looked, or Proto-Semites would have looked. It says Ethiopic subtype that was more widespread across the Western Sahara regions during the Neolithic, when the area was still a green savanna. Reddish medium to dark brown skin, wavy to curly to tight curl hair, dolichocephalic. Pseudo-Semitic features may appear in some individuals, somewhat promiscuous. So here are good representations, two good representations. So there always seems to be a notion that the Semites originally come from Africa and that they are an African people. Here's actually a book that goes into that. He says, Greenberg determined that the Semitic languages really form only one of the 6 or more branches of a much larger language family, Afroasiatic. Even the Semitic subfamily itself is mainly African, 12 of its 19 surviving languages being confined to Ethiopia. This suggests that Afroasiatic languages arose in Africa and that only one branch of them spread to the Near East. Hence, it may have been Africa that gave birth to the languages spoken by the authors of the Old and New Testaments and the Quran, the moral pillars of Western civilization. Really, in a way, he's saying that Africa is, in a way, the birth of all this Afroasiatic culture, including Semitic culture and including the Hebrew scriptures. It's very interesting. And also, geneticist, or should I say a linguist, proposes that this, Christopher Eric, he says, after all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of other people already in the area. So even he believes that Semites, the early Semites, should I say, were African. It's very interesting. So anyways, the ancestors of the Israelites, Afroasiatic Semitic people, could have emerged from North Africa. They would have carried Y-DNA haplogroup E, and they would have looked like Neolithic North Africans. So here's a good visual representation of everything. So the final theory, we finally got to the last theory. The final theory for the origin of Semites and Afroasiatic is the Levant, Israel, by the way. So let's begin. Actually, there's a better paper that goes into this. I don't feel like reading all of this, but basically summing this part up, he's basically saying that Natufians are the origins of Near Eastern cultures, and that Natufians were Afroasiatic people, it says down here, and that they show that Natufians spoke the Afroasiatic language just before this language started to, basically disperse into the daughter languages of Semitic, Cushitic, and Chadic. And here's actually the Natufian homeland and the Proto-Afroasiatic homeland. So now here I'm going to read, it says, given the modern distribution of Semitic languages over the area in question, which belong to the larger Afroasiatic family, it seems appropriate to suggest that these first farmers of the Levant and their Mesolithic predecessors, including the Natufian culture, were speaking a Proto-Afroasiatic language. It may be that Proto-Semitic continued to develop within the Levant and Syria area, since both Eblaite and Akkadian early Semitic languages are there attested early. Are there attested early, the former around 2400 BC. And again, here is the area of Natufian culture, as well as the Levant. And so right here it says, this is dealing with languages and farmers and a little bit with DNA. It says Afroasiatic. The language family consists of 6 branches, 5 including ancient Egypt confined to North Africa, 1 Semitic, also extending in ancient times to Southwest Asia. That distribution suggests an African origin for the family, whose Semitic branch might then have spread into Southwestern Asia, but the overwhelmingly archaeological attested flow of the domesticated crops and animals from Neolithic times onward into Egypt and through the Arabian Peninsula into Ethiopia is out of Southwest Asia rather than out of Africa. That would make it surprising for Semitic languages to have spread against that stream. There are 2 principal competing hypotheses for the origin of Afroasiatic. Really, there's like 5 different ones, but anyways. One based on reconstruction of the early vocabulary for cultural and environmental refrains places the homeland in the Levant during the earliest Neolithic. The late Natufian culture, 9,500 BC, with the subsequent 2 prolonged spread of 5,000 BC. That is well documented archaeologically. Mixed farming across the Nile into Egypt and North Africa, giving rise to the Egyptian Berber branches of Afroasiatic languages, and sheep and goat based pastoralism from Western Arabia across the Red Sea into Ethiopia and Sudan, giving rise to the Cushitic, Omotic, and Chadic branches. Semitic spread into Ethiopia much later. That Southwest Asian origin would now be masked by language replacement in the homeland, including the spread of the Semitic branch of Afroasiatic languages, including Akkadian or Babylonian, Aramaic, and Arabic in historic times. So here from this same paper, by the way, is the spread of agriculture during the Neolithic period from the Fertile Crescent into North Africa and into the Horn of Africa. There's another closer image. And here's the image of the spread of Afroasiatic. And again, Afroasiatic pretty much dominates North Africa and the Middle East. Doesn't go into Europe really. It doesn't go into any other areas, just Arabia, Fertile Crescent, and Africa. So this is actually a good paper that deals also with the origins of Afroasiatics and Semites among the Natufians. It says the Proto-Afrosan speakers can be identified with high probability with the creators of the Natufian and post-Natufian early Neolithic archaeological culture of the Levant. The identification of the Proto-Afrosans as Natufians and post-Natufians seems to satisfy all 4 criteria. Besides the farming lexicon, there are 2 sets of reconstructed Proto-Afrosan terms pointing to the intercepted animal breedings. Finally, the Levant appears to be an attested region from where populations began to spread starting in the early Neolithic, covering not only wide tracts of southwestern Asia, but also the adjacent parts of the Mediterranean and Africa. So what's interesting about this is that they're basically saying that the Neolithic time period is when you see the spread of Afroasiatic, and this actually links with the spread of haplogroup E. According to this paper, it says the role of the Levant and Neolithic dispersal of E3B1-M35 sublineages is supported by the data. So it's likely that haplogroup E spread from, well, it is a fact that haplogroup E spread from the Levant in the Neolithic period, which matches with the spread of Afroasiatic in the Neolithic period. It's actually a good representation, a visual representation of E-M35 spreading into North Africa, spreading into Mesopotamia, spreading into Anatolia, even into Arabia and into the Horn of Africa. And there are different branches that you see haplogroup E in more places than others. And here are also the dates that you see. This is 2019 version. And here's also a map showing the migration of Afroasiatic into the North Africa, the Horn of Africa, and the Middle East. It's perfectly overlaps each other. It's kind of interesting. And so here's basically a good representation of both the area of the Natufian culture, spread of haplogroup E, and the spread of Proto-Afro-Asiatic. So you can see it all on one page. All right, so this paper is also pretty good. It goes into Natufians and haplogroup E and Afroasiatic. So it says, the 2005 book, First Farmers, The Origins of Agricultural Societies by Peter Bellwood provides an excellent resource for linguists who wish to explore the worldwide correlation between the origins of agriculture and the expansion of languages. Prior to the adoption of agriculture in Southwest Asia and elsewhere in the world, for that matter, the human tribe practiced hunter-gatherer techniques in order to survive. The evolution of agriculture in Southwest Asia generally follows a series of cultural transitions that begin with the Natufians, followed by the pre-pottery Neolithic A and pre-pottery Neolithic B, and then finally the development of pottery itself. The Natufians stand as an important cultural transition because they were the first, or should I say the last, hunter-gatherers in the Middle East. The Natufians appeared near the Sea of Galilee in what is now present-day Israel. So the Afroasiatic language family consists of 376 languages. These languages are distributed throughout the Middle East, as well as in North Africa, East Africa, and South and West Central Africa. Afroasiatic is subdivided into 6 main branches: Egyptian, Semitic, Chadic, Cushitic, Omotic, and Berber. Long-standing opinion amongst linguists places the prehistoric origins of Afroasiatic languages somewhere in East Africa. Interestingly, linguistic data may also support this model on Afroasiatic origins using linguistic reconstruction by Militav or Militavi presents a Proto-Afroasiatic lexicon of farming terminology. Based on the reconstruction, he suggested that the Natufians' agriculture and Afroasiatic co-evolved in Southwest Asia. Finally, another reason for identifying Southwest Asia as the putative homeland of Afroasiatic languages is the Y chromosome data as presented below in section 4 and 5. So here's section 4 and 5. It says, focusing now on the green cluster, or you're not even going to see that, but anyways, focusing now on the green cluster, figure 5.5.4 reflects the mutation within this cluster are variants of the E-Z827 haplogroup. An interesting study from 2016, Litzarts, was available to extract 3 ancient DNA samples from a Natufian archaeological site in Israel. As the reader may recall from section 2 above, the Natufians were the last hunter-gatherers of Southwest Asia. 2 of the samples belong to E-PF1961, which is an ancestral marker for E-M34. The E-M34 mutation has a wide distribution, currently found in the population of the Mediterranean Europe, Southeastern Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and East Africa. For linguists, the E-M35 mutation is significant as it represents the potential back to Africa marker that co-expanded from Southwest Asia into East Africa with goat and sheep herders about 6,000 years ago. This Neolithic migration, as the reader may recall from section 3 above, appears to have carried Afroasiatic languages from Southwest Asia to East and North Africa. The ancient Natufian Y chromosome data, as just presented, supports this position because the E-PF1961 mutation is an upstream marker for E-M34. Thus, E-M34 probably involved in the Middle East. Additionally, an analysis of contemporary genetic data also supports Middle Eastern and agricultural origins of Afroasiatic languages in East Africa. Carnegie suggests that E-M34 arose in the Levant based on their interpretation of the data and wider distribution of the marker outside of Africa. Additionally, Cadnis, 2008, date the E-M123 mutation in the Middle East to about 11,000 years ago, which potentially places the evolution of the downstream E-M34 mutation during the Southwest Asian Neolithic. Now let's actually visualize this mutation from the Levant, and also let's visualize the mutation of haplogroup E as well as Afroasiatic languages from the Levant. So here's a good video. You can find that video on YouTube. Just type in migration, I believe, of Afroasiatic languages, and you should be able to find that. Now, here's another video you can type in. You can type in, I believe this one is called The Migration of Haplogroup E, made by 2 different people, by the way. The origins of Afroasiatic languages being in the Levant, made by somebody else. And someone who made this made the migration of haplogroup E. And it's very interesting because it sort of has the same similarities in the places that they went to, which is why I'm showing this. So as you can see, when it comes to those two representations of migration patterns, it really does fit each other. The migration of Proto-Afroasiatic from the Levant and the migration of haplogroup E from the Levant. And so, it's actually believed now, let's shift our minds to Semites specifically. It's believed that Semites come and descend from the Natufians, who are Neolithic Levantines. So from this book, it says, this paper makes an additional inference since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. Now, Neolithic Levantines, the ancestors of Semites, only had haplogroup E. So here's a paper that says, craniometric analysis have suggested an affinity between the Natufians and populations of North or Sub-Saharan Africa, a result that finds some support from the Y chromosome analysis, which shows that the Natufians, the successor Neolithic or Levantine Neolithic populations, carried haplogroup E of likely ultimate African origin, which has not been detected in other ancient males of West Asia. Here's another paper. It says, such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. And here's yet again another paper. These findings contrast with both earlier Neolithic and Paleolithic Levantine populations, which were dominated by haplogroup E. Now, the latest study on the origins of Semitic languages has its birth in the Levant. It is, of course, the area where Natufians were, and likely, these Semites would descend from the Natufians. So here's the paper that deals with the most recent origins for Semitic languages. So it says, the evolution of languages provide a unique opportunity to study human population history. The origin of Semitic and the nature of dispersals by Semitic-speaking populations are of great importance to our understanding of the ancient history of the Middle East and Horn of Africa. Our statistical tests of alternative Semitic history support and man, my tongue getting twisted.
I got you. Where are we?
You started our statistical test of alternative, like right here.
Our statistical test of alternative Semitic history support an initial divergence of Akkadian from ancestral Semitic over competing hypotheses, e.g., an African origin of Semitic. We estimate an early Bronze Age origin for Semitic approximately 5,750 years ago in the Levant, and further propose the contemporary Ethio-Semitic language of Africa reflects a single introduction of early Ethio-Semitic from southern Arabia approximately 2,800 years ago.
And so now let's get into the origins of Semitic. It says, our analysis of the Semitic language family produced a date of
phylogeny.
Man, my tongue. Phylogeny that estimates the origin of Semitic at approximately 4,400 through 7,400 YBP. This results indicate that the ancestor of all Semitic languages in our data set was being spoken in the Near East no earlier than approximately 7,400 YBP, after having diverged from Afroasiatic in Africa. The discovery of such early Semitic languages could increase estimates of the age of Semitic and alter its geographical origin if these early Semitic languages were found in Africa rather than in the Middle East. So here's a map from the same study, by the way, showing us the dispersal of Semitic languages and people from the Levant into Mesopotamia, into Africa, into southern Arabia, and the origin of Afroasiatic being near the Red Sea. It says map of Semitic languages and its inferred dispersals. It says the map also presents the dispersal of Semitic languages inferred from our study and origin of Afroasiatic along the African coast of the Red Sea, supported by all comparative analysis. It indicated in red, although other African origins of Afroasiatic has been proposed, such as Southwest Ethiopia, the assumed location of its divergence of ancestral Semitic from Afroasiatic between the African coast of the Red Sea and the Near East is indicated in italics. So it says, our estimate for the origin of Semitic 4,400 through 7,400 YBP predates the first Akkadian inscriptions in the archaeological records of northern Mesopotamia by approximately 100 through 3,000 years. The city-states of Sumer were established and flourishing in Mesopotamia with their own indigenous languages unrelated to Semitic by approximately 5,400 YBP. So it is unlikely that Akkadian was spoken in Sumer for the entry of the possibility 3,000 year interval between the origin of Semitic and Akkadian's initial appearance in the archaeological record. The presence of ancient members of the two oldest Semitic groups, East and West Semitic, in the same region of the Levant, combined with a possible long interval, 100 through 3,000 years, between the origin of Sahara of a Semitic origin, East Levant, and a later movement eastward into Mesopotamia and Sumer. So it says we use the Bayesian phylogenetic model to elucidate the relationship and divergence dates of Semitic languages, which we then related to the epiographic and archaeological record to produce a comprehensive hypothesis of Semitic origins and dispersals after the divergence of ancestral Semitic from Afroasiatic in Africa. We estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin of 5,750 YBP in the Levant, followed by the expansion of Akkadian in Mesopotamia. So basically, it's believed that Afroasiatic was in Africa and Semitic came from Afroasiatic in Africa and really formed itself in the Levant. And then Akkadians would have expanded, Akkadians and other Proto-Semitic people have expanded from the Levant into Mesopotamia. And so this is an interesting model. Well, what's interesting about this model for the spread of Proto-Semitic languages is that it fits the spread of haplogroup E. So let me show you why. So again, this is the same model from the paper that deals with the latest origins of Semitic. And here again is the model for the spread of haplogroup E. And when you really look at it, it's really like you're dealing with the same people and the same type of migration patterns. Like you have some of these Semites going into the Horn of Africa, just like you have branches of E going into the Horn of Africa. You have Semites going into Mesopotamia, like you have, or E going into Mesopotamia, like you have Semites going into Mesopotamia. And we'll actually go deeper into that a little bit later. So it says, now ironically, or perhaps unironically, it is believed that Proto-Semites had haplogroup E and spread it particularly from the Levant. I find that to be a bit ironic, because this paper actually starts to put the pieces together. So it says E-M123 originated some 19,000 years ago during the last ice age. Its place of origin is uncertain, but it was probably in the Red Sea region, somewhere between the southern Levant and Ethiopia. Its main subclade, E-M34, most probably emerged in the Levant about 15,000 years ago. Soon afterwards, M34 split into two branches, M84 and Z81 and Z841, which were probably found in the Fertile Crescent during the Neolithic period. And this is the Fertile Crescent, just in case no one quite knows what that region is. Fertile Crescent includes the Levant and Egypt. And this is where E likely was. So it says E-M34 lineages experienced a much more dramatic expansion during the Chalcolithic, which is the Copper Age period. Also downstream of ECTS 1096, the Y14891 and Z21018 clades are typically found on people of Jewish ancestry, while PF6391 and Z21421 are found in the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and the Arabian Peninsula. F1382 appears to have expanded during the Iron Age from the Levant to the Arabian Peninsula, where it is almost exclusively found. Now, when I named all those clades, like CTS 1096, those are different branches of E, by the way. So actually, here's a good representation of E migrating into Mesopotamia. Here's the old clade of M34 in the Levant. And then here's another clade. This one is actually 17,900 YBP. Then here's another clade that comes a few years later, 15,000 years later, in what's really in between the Levant and Mesopotamia. And then here's another clade as well that we see. These are ancient clades that we found in archaeology. And here are actually the people that belong specifically, let's say, to the clade Z841. For instance, you find Iranians with it, Armenians, Arabs, Kurds, Syrians, Persians, and people of that nature. I could take a bunch of screenshots of all the people that have it, but I'm just took this one just to show you the general people who have this ancient E marker. And then here's another one. This one is 7,500 years old, which is a lot sooner or later. Well, no, sooner. And you found a lot of Middle Eastern and Southern Europeans with this one as well. And this one's in Mesopotamia, the clay we found. And then here's another one, which is 4,600 years ago, which is around the time of the early Bronze Age, possibly late Chalcolithic, but early Bronze Age. And again, you find a lot of Middle Easterners with this one, and it's dead in the center of Mesopotamia. And you sort of see this migration of various ancient E markers we find slowly moving its way out of the Levant into the Mesopotamia region, which could have been more than likely is these Akkadians or Proto-Semitic people like Akkadians coming into Mesopotamia. And you also have some going south to places like Yemen. But anyways, this paper actually confirms and says that E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1B and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. And again, what did this paper say about the origin of Semitic languages? It says, we estimate Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant. And what does this say? Early Bronze Age origin in late Copper with haplogroup E. So when you put the two pieces together, it makes a lot of sense. So here's also another visual representation, because I'm a very visual person. Here's haplogroup E spreading, and here's Semitic spreading. It perfectly fits. And again, here's another representation of haplogroup E slowly making its way to Mesopotamia, reaching it around the time of the early Bronze Age. Perfect visuals, if you ask me. So anyways, haplogroup E is the best candidate for the lineage of early Afroasiatics and Semitic populations. One of the top 3 beliefs for the origins of Afroasiatic, including Semites, is that they emerged from the Levant and carried haplogroup E. Now, how would these Natufians, the ancestors of Semites, look? So now we're at the phenotype stage of it. So it is a further surprise that the Epipaleolithic Natufian of Israel, from whom the Neolithic realm was assumed to arise, has a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa. Interestingly enough, however, a small Natufian sample falls between the Niger-Congo group and the other samples used. This placement suggests that there may have been a sub-Saharan African element in the makeup of the Natufians, as shown in Figure 1. The Somalis and the Egyptian Bronze Age sample in Naquata may also have a hint of a sub-Saharan African component. Dahomey and Heya samples were run as a Niger-Congo twin. Then Naquata Bronze Age Egyptian, the Nubia Bronze Age, Israeli Falahim Arabic farmers, and the Somali samples were lumped as prehistoric / recent Northeast Africa. So here's a model showing that really a Natufian, like this is dealing with like, what's the word? Biology, it's dealing with the biology of Natufians. And they're really close to Niger-Congo people. And then next after that, it's like prehistoric and recent Northeast African people. So they kind of like phenotypically look similar to these like type of people. And basically Natufians like dead center in between a Niger-Congo and a prehistoric / Northeastern African type. He's like in between. So it says the Niger-Congo speakers, the Dahomey, Congo, and the Heya cluster closely with each other and a bit less closely with the Nubian sample, both the recent and Bronze Age Nubians, and more remotely with the Naquata Bronze Age sample from Egypt or of Egypt, the modern Somalis and the Arabic-speaking Falahim farmers of Israel. When those samples were separated and run in a single analysis, as in Figure 1, there clearly is a tie between them that is diluted the further one gets from sub-Saharan Africa. And so the conclusion is if the late Paleocene Natufian sample from Israel is the source from which that Neolithic spread was derived, then there was clearly a sub-Saharan African element present in almost equal importance as the late prehistoric Eurasian element. So basically they're saying that there definitely was like a sub-Saharan African element in the Neolithic Levant and Israel. And so what would a Natufian look like? Because it sort of gives us an idea. So here's actually a reconstruction of a Natufian from Jericho. And as you can see, his features are very interesting. And I actually put his face against Common. And if you ask me, Common does look a lot like the Natufian, and the Natufian does look a lot like Common. Would you agree, Genesis?
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. I can see those same particular facial features in the cheek and around the jaw ridge.
Yeah. The nose and the lips and whatnot. But moving on now. So the ancestors of the Israelites, which would be Afroasiatic Semitic people, could have emerged from the Levant or Israel. They would have carried haplogroup E, and they would have looked like Natufians. And here's just a full representation of everything I just said in one photo. The migration of haplogroup E, the migration of Semitic, the Natufian homeland being in the Levant, Proto-Semitic being haplogroup E, and what a Natufian would look like. So putting everything together that we said, what are the locations for the origins of Afroasiatic? The Horn of Africa, Yemen, Arabian Peninsula, Eastern Sahara, Nile Valley, Red Sea region, North Africa, Sahara Sahel region. Levant, Natufians. So the Horn of Africa, Yemen, Arabian Peninsula, Eastern Sahara, North Africa, and the Levant. These are the general homelands for the origin of Afro-Asiatic people. These are the general regions. Here's just a visual representation of all the places that is believed Proto-Afro-Asiatic, including Semitic, originated from. And actually, what's interesting about the origins of Afro-Asiatic is that it matches the exact same origins for haplogroup E. So, because this is where various E clades are believed to have emerged. And actually, if you were to overlap the origins of Afro-Asiatic and the origins of haplogroup E, they fit quite well with each other. So, but generally, it's believed that the origins of Afro-Asiatic was either in the Horn of Africa, Eastern Sahara, North Africa, or with Levantine Natufians. Here's actually a good visual representation of that. And it says a commonly proposed homeland is northeastern Africa, particularly in or near Ethiopia, in part due to the presence of many branches of the family in or near that region and in Africa. According to others, words of fauna and flora and evidence of linguistic contact with language families known to have spoken in Eurasia suggest that its homeland was in the Middle East, probably the Levant. Some geneticists and archaeologists have argued for a back migration of Proto-Afro-Asiatic speakers from Western Asia to Africa as early as the 10th millennium BC. It has been suggested that the Natufian culture might have spoken a Proto-Afro-Song language just as prior to the disintegration into sub-languages. The hypothesis is supported by Afro-Asiatic terms for early livestock and crops in Anatolia and Iran, but would then imply that the branches other than Semitic develop outside of the proposed homeland. And according to linguistic Vlachov, Blazik, the possibility of language similar to Cushitic being formally spoken originally in the South Arabia also speaks for a Middle Eastern origin. But some other proposals posit Northern Africa or the Horn of Africa as possible places of origin. So basically, they're saying have it highlighted the different origins. Some saying it's it's the Horn of Africa. Some saying it's the Sahara. Some saying it's the Levant. These are the main origins. It says right here, Proto-Semitic is a hypothetical reconstructed proto-language ancestral to Semitic languages. There is no consensus regarding the location of Proto-Semitic homeland. I'm not going to say that word, but I know it means homeland. Scholars hypothesize that it may have originated in the Levant, the Sahara, or the Horn of Africa, and the view that it arose in the Arabian Peninsula has also been common historically. And the time period tends to be 3,750 BC. And again, this basically is saying the same thing. It basically says the Semitic family is a member of the larger Afro-Asiatic family, all of whom other 5 or more branches have their origins in North Africa or the Maghreb. Largely for this reason, the ancestors of Proto-Semitic speakers were originally believed by some to have first arrived in the Middle East from North Africa, possibly as part of the operation of the Sahara pump around the late Neolithic. Dinkoff sees, and then here's Dinkoff's theory, Dinkoff sees Semitic originating between the Nile Delta and Canaan as the 4th most branch of Afro-Asiatic. Then here's another theory, Blinch even wonders whether the highly divergent Goreg languages indicate an origin in Ethiopia, with the rest of the Ethiopic Semitic, a later back migration. And then here's another theory saying that according to Christy G. Turner II, there is an archaeological and physical anthropological reason for a relationship between modern Semitic speaking populations of the Levant and the Natufian culture. So yet again, the three main theories for the origin of Afroasiatic and Proto-Semitic is the Horn of Africa, Red Sea of the Eastern Sahara, and the Levant. Just drilling that in. So all these origins are fascinating, but the Levant origin of Afroasiatic is particularly interesting because many geneticists do believe that haplogroup E has a Levant / Eurasian origin, and it was part of a back to Africa migration. So here's a paper down below. I have the link that you can type in on Google for those that are wondering what I'm reading. So it says D and E, which both descend from DE-YAP, the first mutation that split into the E branch that perhaps returned to Africa. It's believed that E returned to Africa, according to this Spirit Group study. And this is another one, and I also have in blue the paper. And it says YAP mutation occurred outside Africa, forming the DE clade, and this dispersed onto East Asia, becoming D. So D went east, while the second DE branch returned to Eastern Africa, there becoming E. So E was a back to Africa migration. Here's another paper that basically says haplogroup E is one of the two branches of the mega haplogroup DE. It originated approximately 50,000 years ago. Scientists believe that it either arose in Africa or represents a back migration. Again, in blue is where you can get the link from. And again, I actually read this one earlier. It's from 23andMe. Basically says, again, it's possible that the men carrying the DE haplogroup journeyed from Africa across the Red Sea and into the Arabian Peninsula, but it is also possible that DE originated within the Arabian Peninsula itself and later spread back into Africa. I also read this paper earlier as well, but I'll go ahead and read. It says regions near but external to northeastern Africa, like the Levant or the southern Arabian Peninsula, could have served as an incubator for the diversification of the non-African unpaternal haplogroup varieties like Y haplogroup or Y chromosome DE-YAP. This model would imply that both CF-P143 and the DE-YAP evolved nearby but outside Africa. One DE-YAP ancestor would have spread to Asia and evolved to haplogroup D, while other DE-YAP returned to Northeast Africa and evolved into haplogroup E. And here's another paper. The link is down below. It says, but the fact that haplogroup E is closely linked with haplogroup D, which is not found in Africa, leaves open to the possibility that E first arose in the Near or Middle East and was subsequently carried into Africa by a back migration. E1B1B1 probably involved either in Northeast Africa or the Near East and then expanded to the west, both north and south of the Mediterranean Sea. So here's actually a good representation to me of where haplogroup DE could have split. I believe it split in Mesopotamia, and I also have a little representation of the Tower of Babel, but we'll get to that in another presentation. But here's a paper that actually goes into the separation of haplogroup DE. I'll let Genesis take on this one. Get a swallow of water.
All right, the punctuated burst in human male demography inferred from 1,244 worldwide Y chromosome sequences by G. David Posnick et al. Says consistent with previous proposals, a parsimonious interpretation of the phylogeny is that the predominant African haplogroup E arose outside the continent. This model of geographic segregation within the CT clade requires just one continental haplogroup exchange, E to Africa, rather than 3, D, C, and F out of Africa. Furthermore, the timing of the putative return of Africa between the emergence of E and its differentiation within Africa by 58,000 years ago is consistent with proposals based on the non-Y data of abundant gene flow between Africa and nearby regions of Asia 50 to 80,000 years ago.
And again, we're continuing with the known fact that E likely originated outside of Africa. Here's another study that goes into it. It says, such an ancestral node would imply that DE is a subset of Eurasian variation, that therefore the African YAP chromosomes could be considered as due to a back migration from Asia. Here's yet another study. Actually, I think I read this one actually. I read that one. And I read that one as well. All right, so here's another study. It says, in contrast, Hammer and Attilidid and Hammer of 1997 hypothesized an alternative Asian origin. The lineage that acquired the YAP insertion of polymorphism is divided into 2 subclusters, haplogroup E, found today in Africa and the Mediterranean, and haplogroup D, found in Japan and Southeast Asia. Y chromosome data on Indian populations reveal that the parental lineages of present-day populations is predominantly derived from the original Indian gene pool rather than a recent influx. And here's another paper, by the way, a new one. Haplogroup D chromosomes have not been found anywhere outside of Asia. The likely place of origin of this haplogroup. These lineages are most commonly found in Central Asia, Tibet, and in Japan, and are also present in low frequencies in Southeast Asia and among the Andaman Islanders. Here's a map of haplogroup D. As they said, it's seen in India, it's seen in Japan, it's seen basically in the Far East. And this is why it's believed that DE originated outside of Africa, because you pretty much find no D in Africa, although you could find like a few people with it, but for the most part, you find none. Predominantly near Tibet, near India, Japan, and other locations. So here is another paper dealing with haplogroup E. It says E is now defined by 18 mutations. There are a total of 83 polymorphic sites that mark lineages within this clade, compared with a total of 30 internal mutations in 2002. This makes haplogroup E by far the most mutational diverse of all major Y chromosome clades. These polymorphisms define 56 distinct haplogroups, can be found at high frequencies in Africa, at moderate frequencies in the Middle East and Southern Europe, and with occasional occurrences in Central and East Asia. So actually, here's a good map showing haplogroup E. Really, if DE originated outside of Africa, E will be seen more so as an invader in Africa. It came into Africa, and it would have pushed haplogroups such as A and B southward as E entered into the region from the Sinai and even from Yemen. And Adia over here will be with other peoples of the East. So whether Afroasiatics originated outside of Africa or in Africa, or whether haplogroup E originated outside of Africa or in Africa, we find both Afroasiatic and haplogroup E in every location, either returning to Africa from the back to African migration, or originating in Africa and expanding outward. I want to make this point pretty clear, that because some people might pinpoint you and say, well, E only originated in the Horn of Africa and therefore you're this or that. But But even if E did originate in, let's say, the Horn of Africa, Afroasiatics also originated there, including Semites. Or if people want to say, you know, haplogroup E originated outside of Africa, okay, fine. That still doesn't discount E being Afroasiatic in origin, because we see that E is still connected to Afroasiatic. So I just wanted y'all to understand the various places where E originated from and the various places where Afroasiatic originated from, how they overlap, no matter where people want to try to shift the goalpost of haplogroup E or Afroasiatic origins. Again, just visualizing everything I said. The most known point, Horn of Africa, Eastern Africa, or the Levant. So, with all that being said, the best candidate for the widely named haplogroup of Proto-Afroasiatics and Proto-Semitic peoples is haplogroup E. Now, let's explain why. Afroasiatics equal haplogroup E. That's pretty much why. It's pretty much an established, it's pretty much, you know, it's pretty much been established by most linguists and geneticists that haplogroup E males were the originators of Afroasiatic languages. You know, as I read earlier, most papers sort of point to this idea that Iwembiwembi lineages are closely linked to the diffusion of Afroasiatic languages. Here's another book that goes over it. It says most of the Afroasiatic speakers share a lineage defined by YAP descent called PN2-215-M35. Here's yet another one. The Proto-Afroasiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups, including current speakers of the Afroasiatic languages and pastoralist populations. So many papers do allude to the idea that E is Afroasiatic and vice versa. And if you look at a map of Afroasiatic languages and a map of haplogroup E, both of them overlap each other. So here again is a map of Afroasiatic languages, and here is a map of haplogroup E. Now, if you overlap them, they perfectly fit each other like a puzzle piece. Haplogroup E and Afroasiatic are definitely one and the same. The early Afroasiatic speakers would have carried haplogroup E, and we still see it in their descendants to this day, you know, thousands of years later. It's pretty much believed by Christopher Eric and Shomakov Kites have suggested that geography of Iwembiwembi lineages coincides with the distribution of Afroasiatic languages. So Afroasiatic and haplogroup E hauntingly overlap one another. It's not shocking why most scholars would agree haplogroup E men were the first Afroasiatic speakers and spread both their language and Y-DNA. Haplogroup E is seen in some of the oldest Afroasiatic speaking regions, but not only do we find old samples of E in Afroasiatic territory, but to this day, we still find haplogroup E dominating these regions. So here are actually oldest, really old samples that we found of haplogroup E, for instance, in the Caspian, Morocco, in the Tufian samples in Israel, in the Jordan of Israel, of the Levant, Ibero-Mauritians in Morocco, and in the Jordan as well, in Egypt, and in, I believe it's like in Greece, I believe. And this one's also in Greece. But if you see the map, you can perfectly see over here the distribution of various E clades and how they perfectly just fit Afroasiatic speakers. Here's also another visual representation, just in case you couldn't see that. Afroasiatic languages, Iwembiwembi, everything lines up perfectly when you can visualize E and Afroasiatic. Afroasiatic and haplogroup E also fits well with the migration of both the language and the haplogroup, as well as pastoralism from the Levant region. So I'm actually going to show this when it comes to that. Also, here's Afroasiatic and haplogroup E as well. But With that being said, seeing how well Afroasiatic and haplogroup E overlap, I agree with linguists and geneticists that haplogroup E is the founder of Afroasiatic, because when we look at the most ancient societies and civilizations, we do see E right in the center of these people. Let me just show you a larger map of this, the Afroasiatic language group and civilizations along with haplogroup E. I think it perfectly fits well than any other haplogroup would. Haplogroup E is found in the regions that were influenced. Haplogroup E is even found in regions that were influenced by Afro-Asiatic speakers, such as Greece, because the Greek alphabet comes from Afro-Asiatic, if you didn't know. So here's actually like a timeline map of Afro-Asiatic all the way to Greece, beginning with ancient Egyptian to Proto-Sinaitic to Phoenician to Greek to Etruscan to Latin. Really of the modern language and the modern alphabets come from Afro-Asiatic people and Afro-Asiatic speakers. When you look at the timeline of it, the Greeks specifically got their alphabet from the Phoenicians, though. So here's actually a good visual map of the language scripts coming from Egypt into the Levant, into Greek, into the Balkans, and into Italy. And here's actually a visual representation of Proto-West Semitic, and then to Proto-Central Semitic, to Northwest Semitic, to Phoenician, and also to Greek. So when it comes to Proto-Sinaitic, the North Semitic alphabet is considered the earliest trace of alphabetic writing and the common ancestor of both the ancient South Arabian script and the Phoenician alphabet, which led to many modern alphabets, including the Greek alphabet. And here's sort of like a visual representation again. The Phoenician alphabet. And so I'm gonna just skim through this so y'all can see some of the how the languages were being passed on. And then I'm gonna go to actually what Herodotus believes when it comes to this spread. So according to the legends recounted by Herodotus, the alphabet was first introduced to Greece by a Phoenician man named Cladamus. The Phoenicians who came with Cadamus, amongst whom were the Graphomai introduced into Greece after their settlement in the country, a number of accomplishments, of which the most important was writing and art till then, I think, unknown by the Greeks. At first, they, the Phoenicians, used the same characters as all other Phoenicians, but as time went on, they changed their language. They also changed the shape of their letters. At that time, most of the Greeks in the neighborhood were Ionians. They were taught these letters by the Phoenicians and adopted it, with a few alterations for their own use, continuing to refer to them as the Phoenician characters, as was only right as the Phoenicians had introduced them. So also from Phoenician came Old Italic, as well as Etruscan and Latin. It has roots in Semitic alphabet and its offshoot alphabets, the Phoenician, the Greek, and the Etruscans. And there's the Etruscan. So what's interesting about the spread of Afroasiatic Semitic languages to Greece and Italy is that it fits the spread of haplogroup E to Greece as well. Phoenicians did travel to Greece, and there could have been intermarriages as well as linguistic exchanges, which it seems that Herodotus is pointing to. So here's actually a spread of haplogroup E into Greece. and a lot of Greek, and also into Italy. And a lot of Greeks, interestingly, have a specific clade E-V13. And this sort of fits what Herodotus said about Phoenicians coming and settling with Greeks. And I assume when they settled, they also intermarried with the women. So here's a paper dealing with E being in Europe. It says, on the European continent, it has been highest concentration in Kosovo, over 45%, Albania and Montenegro, both 27%, Bulgaria, 26%, Macedonia and Greece, both 21%, Cyprus, 20%, Sicily, 20%, Southern Italy, 18.5%, Serbia, 18%, and Romania at 15%. So here's a map of haplogroup E in Europe, with its highest distribution being in the southern Mediterranean, specifically in the Balkans and in Greece, and the eastern side or western side of Anatolia. And here's a map of the branches of haplogroup E, this specific clade that's in Europe. So it says right here that E-M34 lineages experience a much more dramatic expansion during the Chalcolithic Copper Age period. These lineages continue to expand around the Middle East, Greece, and Italy during the Bronze Age, again, when Semitic languages started to appear. Nowadays, the FGC 18412, aka Y5412 clade, is the main variety of E1B1B found in Europe. Also downstream of CTS 1096, the Y14891 and Z21018 clades are typically found among people of Jewish ancestry, while PF6391 and Z21421 are found in the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and the Arabian Peninsula. F1382 appears to have expanded during the Iron Age from the Levant to the Arabian Peninsula, where it is almost exclusively found. So specifically dealing with Phoenicians, Greeks, and Roman diffusion of E-M34, it says, the classical antiquity brought new waves of colonists across the Mediterranean. The first colonists were Phoenicians, who came from present-day Lebanon and the Tarsus province of Syria. The Phoenicians possessed a variety of paternal lineages reflecting the complex ancient history of the Middle East. One of them was E-M34, notably Levantine clades like Y155558 and Z21421, which makes up about 15% of modern Lebanese Y-DNA, but was probably higher before the Greek, Roman, Arabic, Byzantine, medieval Crusader, and Ottoman occupations altered the gene pool, the local gene pool. So basically, this is saying that E could have been in the Lebanese even at a higher percentage in the past before all these other groups started entering the Levant. But anyways, it says that E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1B, and it's thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. The Phoenicians would have spread E-M34 to Cyprus, Malatina, Sicily, Sardinia, Iberia, and southern Iberia. So it says also further on that ancient Greeks contributed to this diffusion of more E-M34 and E-V13 around places such as Cyprus, Sicily, southern Italy, Liguria province, eastern Spain, and basically all parts of the classical ancient Greek world. The Etruscans, who may have come from western Anatolia, could have brought E-M34 to central Italy, which would then have been assimilated by the Romans. And here's a good image of various Greek populations and Southern European populations with a haplogroup E. And as I said before, basically my idea is that, or what it appears to be according to these geneticists and linguists, is that Phoenicians could have spread E into the Greek population. Here's another map. There's a lot of good maps that show this E clade in Southern Europe. So using the Phoenicians as an example for the spread of Afroasiatic and haplogroup E, we see that both the language family and Y-DNA perfectly overlaps each other. There's just a visual representation of how the migration of Afroasiatic language into the Balkans fits the migration of E into the Balkans as well. So, with that being said, Afroasiatic and haplogroup E hauntingly overlap one another. We see this through migrations of DNA and language. Haplogroup E is seen in some of the oldest Afroasiatic speaking regions. To this day, we still see haplogroup E dominating these regions. Anciently, Proto-Afroasiatics, including Proto-Semites, carried haplogroup E. This is my main point. When you put all the information together. Therefore, logically speaking, it would only make sense for the Israelites and their ancient ancestors to have carried haplogroup E through the paternal line of Proto-Semites. So, Proto-Afroasiatic phenotype. Now we're on a new topic. We looked into the best likelihood for Y-DNA of Israel's ancestors. This was dealing with genotype. Now let's look into phenotype. With that being said, what did the ancestors of Israel look like? I wonder if I have to do a Q&A right now and then go into phenotype one, or should I just go ahead and get into phenotype? What do you think, Genesis? Did you hear me? Because I could keep going, get into phenotype, and then do a Q&A there. Yeah, I think I might keep going, and then we can stop right there, actually. All right, so looking into the origin, location, and time frame of Afroasiatic people, the language, Afroasiatic people and language actually gives us a good idea of how the original Afroasiatic speakers would have looked. Let's recap the location and time frame of Proto-Afroasiatics. So it's believed that Proto-Afroasiatics, including Semites, originated in the Horn of Africa, Eastern Sahara, North Africa, or the Levant. Proto-Afroasiatics emerged during the pre-Neolithic, Neolithic, or late Neolithic periods. Let's see how Proto-Afroasiatics would have looked in these regions. So remember, these are the regions that they originated from, like the Horn of Africa. And we said that Proto-Ethiopid would probably be the best phenotype for these early people, Omotic as well. And then we looked into the Eastern Sahara. So Proto-Afroasiatics from the Eastern Sahara probably would have looked like a Northern Ethiopid type. And then we also looked at North Africa. And I believe that when it comes to Proto-Afroasiatics and Semites from North Africa, they would have had a Saharan Ethiopid phenotype or a West Ethiopid phenotype. And of course, we looked at the Levant. And when it comes to the Levant, they would have looked like Natufian peoples. So Natufians had a phenotype that was like in between Niger-Congo and ancient Northeast African. So basically, the Proto-Afroasiatics, including Proto-Semites, would have been dark-skinned, medium brown to dark brown, even black, dark hair or black, dark eyes, dark brown or black. we're basically dealing with very dark-skinned populations during the Neolithic era. It seems that these indigenous peoples would have been, dark complected. If you take a look at indigenous world skin tone maps, you find that ancient populations of the Middle East and North Africa would have been darker. This is based on UV radiation. So here's a map dealing with the human color correlates with UV light intensity. And here's the UV rays. And so this is more or so the global map of indigenous skin tones. And according to the Fitzpatrick scale, also fits the indigenous world skin tone map, Middle Easterners being type 4 and 5, which is brown to dark brown. So type 4 is like moderate brown, and type 5 is like dark brown. These are the types that that Middle Eastern populations in the past and even today would have had. Again, here's type 4 and 5, which would be like around this range. So the Middle East and Africa most of the world to this day had dark hair and dark eyes. So it makes sense that Proto-Afroasiatics would be dark-haired and dark-eyed people. But also the Middle East and Africa tend to have curly or woolly hair textures. So here's the map dealing with hair texture, and the hair texture of the Middle East and North Africa as well as East Africa tends to be the same. It tends to be a type of wavy to curly hair texture. Because again, what we're trying to do is see what would these ancient Proto-Afroasiatic peoples look like. So hair texture wise, it seems like it would be curly to wavy. And also hair color wise, it seems like it would be black because most of the world population has black hair than lighter hair. And also dealing with eye color, most of the world's population tends to be dark-eyed. So I would say that these people would have been dark-eyed people. So now you heard earlier about the dolichocephalic phenotype. So the dolichocephalic is a long skull. Is sometimes also typical. Is something typical of darker skinned populations from the ancient Middle East and even in Africa and Europe or India. Sorry. And of course, the dolichocephalic long skull is typical in Proto-Afroasiatics from what we read when it comes to Neolithic populations in Africa and West Asia or the Middle East. So as you can see on this map, this is dealing with cranial, and dolichocephalics tend to be throughout the continent of Africa as well as in the Middle East and in India. And again, dolichocephalic is a long skull. Here's another map dealing with dolichocephalic. So now if you put all this information together, you get a pretty good picture that how the original population of Proto-Afroasiatics would look. Basically, they'll be dark-skinned, dark-eyed, dark-haired, curly to woolly hair texture, and a dolichocephalic long skull. So putting this together, we see the skin tone, the hair texture, hair color, and eye color. And again, skin tone, but this time hair texture and skull size. So the indigenous dark-skinned populations of Africa and the Middle East even overlaps with Afroasiatic languages in haplogroup E, also the locations in which haplogroup E and Afroasiatic originated in. So here's like an indigenous map of skin tones as well as Afroasiatic languages and haplogroup E. And again, here is the origin points for haplogroup E and Proto-Afroasiatic and skin tones. So again, I believe that anciently we're dealing with more of a dark-skinned population of people. But returning to the indigenous ancient skin tones of the world, it makes sense that Proto-Afro-Asiatics would have been very dark-skinned based on UV radiation, and they originated based on the area that they originated in and the time period, because we're dealing with Neolithic populations. So the skin color of indigenous people, as well as the UV radiation, and the Fitzpatrick scale, which sort of fits the Middle Eastern skin tones and dark skin tones. But now this moves to another section, such as what did Shem look like? Shem, as we know, is the father of the Afro-Asiatic Semitic people, such as the Israelites, according to the genealogy, of course, that we went over. The language and the genes of Israel going all the way back to Proto-Semitic people, and Semitic being, of course, connected to Afro-Asiatic. Now, what's interesting about the original Afro-Asiatics likely being dark-skinned is the fact that it's believed that Shem was likely dark-skinned according to Hebrews, Arabs, Muslims, Christians, and Persians. For instance, this is from the Rabbi Rabbi Eleazar. He says, he especially blessed Shem and his sons, black but comely, and he gave them the inhabitable earth. And this is from a Muslim writer. The source is highlighted or is in bold. It says, the children of Sam, or Shem, settled in the center of the earth, which is between Saratma and the island and the sea, and between Yemen and Syria. Allah made the prophets of them revealed. Allah made the prophets from them, revealed the books to them, and made them beautiful, gave them a black complexion, luminous and free of blemish. And this is from the Persian historian. He says, born to Noah were Shem, whose descendants' color are a black complexion with a light brownish undertone and a dark blackish brown. And here's another Arabic writer. He says, Allah made the descendants of Sam, Shem, and the descendants of Ham black-skinned. And then this is from a Christian from the 13th century. He says, Shem is the land of the Browns. So what's interesting about this is that the descendants of Shem being dark-skinned isn't strange, because ancient Greeks said that Ethiopians or burnt-faced people lived on both sides of the Red Sea. The Middle East was populated by very dark-skinned populations. So from this book, it says, in ancient times, Ethiopia extended over vast domains in both Africa and Asia. It seems certain, declares Sir E.A. Williams Burge, that classical historians and geographers called the whole region from India to Ethiopia, both countries inclusive, by the name of Ethiopia. And in coincidence, they regard all the dark-skinned and black peoples who inhabit it as Ethiopians. Mention is made of Eastern and Western Ethiopians, and is probably that the Easterners were Asiatics and the Westerners Africans. In addition, Bulge notes that Homer and Herodotus calls all the peoples of the Sudan, Egypt, Arabia, Palestine, and Western Asia and India Ethiopians. Ancient classical historians who wrote about the Ethiopians was Strabo, from whom we note the following. I assert that the ancient Greeks, in the same way as they classified all the northern inhabitants with which they were familiar as Scythians, etc., so I affirm they designated as Ethiopia and the whole of the southern countries toward the ocean. Eudorus says that the Ethiopians were considered as occupying all the south coast of both Asia and Africa, and adds that this is the ancient opinion of the Greeks. Here's from another book, and it says, though the country of Ethiopia is frequently mentioned by classical writers, Homer, Herodotus, Strabo, Diodorus, Pliny, and others, Homer says in the Odyssey of the Ethiopians utmost of mankind that eastward suit those towards the west. These excerpts only show that Homer thought that there were eastern and western Ethiopians. From these various statements, we may conclude that Homer and Herodotus call all peoples of the Sudan, Egypt, Arabia, Palestine, and Western Asia and India as Ethiopians. Homer invented the names Ethiopia and Ethiopians, by the way. It's Greek. The historian, as Herodotus, Strabo, and Pelopi connects Ethiopia with Egypt as well. And there's no doubt that the earliest classical writers considered to be Ethiopians all the peoples who were swarthy or brown-skinned or black-skinned, including the Negroes, and the country in which they lived, whether the Sudan or Western Asia or India, to be Ethiopia. And this sort of makes sense when you deal with ancient populations of people, that these were a bit darker at one point. And by the way, the word Ethiopia means burnt face, if you didn't know. It's burnt face meaning red-brown skin. Even in the 19th to 20th century, anthropologists spoke of a dark belt of humanity that once existed, starting from Africa, going through Arabia to India. For instance, I read this quote about Sir Arthur Keith saying that there was a proto-Negroid belt of mankind stretched across the ancient world from Africa to Malay. And here's a new quote that I'll read to you. Sir Arthur Keith finds that the Arabs, small heads, and decides that they belong to the general belt of brown-skinned humanity stretching from Egypt to India rather than to Europe, rather than to European race proper. He postulates that during the Paleolithic, a solid belt of deeply pigmented non-whites reached from Negro Africa across Arabia to India and out into Malaysia. And that subsequently Caucasian peoples invaded Arabia, and that thus the modern Arab is a mixture between inclusive whites and Aboriginal blacks that were related on the one hand to Hamites and to the other hand, the Dravidians. And you kind of can't see what they mean by this, that at one point there must have been like a belt that stretched from Africa through Arabia to India and even to the Oceania region to Australia, that there was like this long range of people that once existed. Now, even today, anthropologists seem to be aware that early West Asians resembled Africans. For instance, there's a paper that goes over this that says early West Asians resembled Africans. And a great example is possibly the Natufians. But the ancestors of the Israelites, which are Proto-Afro-Asiatic, Proto-Semitic people, were likely a very dark-skinned people with black, woolly, or curly hair and black or brown eyes. And we base this on the location and time period of the origin of Afro-Asiatics. Greek accounts of the Ethiopians on both sides of the Red Sea. 19th century and 20th century anthropologists account on the dark belt of humanity. Modern biologists accounts on early West Asians being African, as well as indigenous world skin tone maps and the Fitzpatrick scale. And perhaps one of the most important accounts come from ancient writers saying that Shem's descendants were dark-skinned people. I believe that this is probably a good representation of how early Shemites would have looked. They would have ranged from a light brown to a medium brown to a dark brown and sometimes even black. And I'm basing this all on the information I put together. And of course, Afroasiatic languages, haplogroup E, overlap with indigenous dark skin tones in Middle East and Africa, as well as locations in which haplogroup E and Afroasiatic originated in. Again, we're putting it all together. So with that being said, I believe that the phenotypes of Israel, Proto-Afroasiatic, Proto-Semite ancestors were a dark brown-skinned people with black hair and dark eyes. And that's my conclusion. Now, technically speaking, I have another study, or not necessarily another study, but I have another presentation I could get into, but I'm not going to. I could save that one for another night, but it actually goes a little bit deeper into haplogroup E and the migration of E into Mesopotamia, and it's sort of like sums everything together, all my thoughts. But I could do that another night if it's all the same to Genesis 49ers.
All right. Powerful information, brother. Powerful information. Anything you want to, leave the people with before we shut down?
If they want to do a Q&A, we can, unless it's too late for you.
Yeah, I got it. I'm pushing it, but I'm sorry, man.
That's all right. That's all right.
I got to get up early.
Yeah, all I'll end with is that no matter where haplogroup E and Afroasiatic all originate pretty much in the same regions and at the same time. And the best case for the origin of Semites, such as the ancestors of Israel, is that they will be E carriers, because no matter where you place the origin of haplogroup E, no matter where you place the origin of Afroasiatic, they're always together, always in the same place. And Semitic is Afroasiatic, and it seems like most linguists and geneticists do agree that Proto-Semitic people would have been an E carrier. So I believe that the ancient Israelites, the ancestors of the Israelites, because that's what this presentation was about, is about the ancestors of Israel. I believe that they would have carried haplogroup E, since Israelites are Semites, according to their genealogy. And then maybe tomorrow I can actually go a little bit more deeper into some of the things. Because tomorrow, if it's all the same to you, tomorrow I can actually go sum everything up, but at the same time give my best scenario for the origin of the Israelites and their ancestors. Because today I went over all the different theories. Tomorrow I can actually go into my theory of the best scenario for Israel's ancestors. That's what I'll do tomorrow, if you want.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I'll give one question because Dasharab is here, but then we really have to wrap this up.
Right. It is late here as well.
Dasharab said, "Can J and E be Semitic at the same time?"
That's a good question. I sort of want to save that question for my breakdown of haplogroup J, but I suppose I can sort of give you a teaser as to explain that question. I don't want to go too deep, but basically, also my computer's about to die. But basically, as most geneticists and linguists say, haplogroup E is Proto-Semitic. So without a shadow of a doubt, I believe that the earliest Semitic-speaking peoples would have carried haplogroup E. With that being said, not long after would come J people, and these J people could have adopted Semitic languages from haplogroup E. And you might be saying, well, is there any evidence of this? Is there any papers that go into this? Just wait in the future. I'll explain and go into the papers that actually could validate what I just said. But to make your answer short, I believe E is Proto-Semitic. J likely adopted the Semitic from E. But like I said, I'll go into that at another time.
All right. Powerful information, brother. I mean, it was so many PowerPoints here within the presentation that the people thoroughly enjoyed it. It was one point that the brother said I slipped up because I try to give you the explosions every time you make a powerful point. And I think it was something about that. One of the slides said that the Africans were the Proto-Semites or something to that
Yeah,
effect.
yeah. Christopher believes that Semites were just a few migrating Africans that came to the Middle East.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. That's powerful. All right, so we're gonna pick up tomorrow. So I will get with you, see what time will work for you, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thanks for having me on the show, and shalom to everyone. Hopefully I can answer questions next time, or even on Clubhouse. I'm about to head on there. Maybe you can answer your questions there on Clubhouse if y'all want.
All right, so you guys heard it. If you guys want to, pick Hebrew of Israel's brain, head on over to the Clubhouse app, and you can reach out to them there. All right. So with that, we're going to close it down. I appreciate everybody. Hit the subscribe button, press the like button. Also, check out Hebrew of Israel on social media as well. Subscribe to his YouTube channel, and he's got like 8 more, so I don't know all of them, but subscribe to those as well. We appreciate you guys, and we appreciate Hebrew of Israel giving his time and dedicating his time and energy to giving us a powerful presentation. All right,
And thanks
brother.
for having me.
Mike for real quick. Mike for real said Clubhouse. What channel? I guess just look up.
I have a my Clubhouse name is if y'all follow Genesis 49ers, he's also friends with me on Clubhouse, so you can find me through him. But my Clubhouse name is, let me see, it's the Hebrew of Israel, but you do the @ Hebrew of Israel. Actually, I can pull up if you don't mind, I can pull it up on here again.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Is my account. Y'all can ask me whatever questions y'all have. Let me share my screen really quick. So here's my account again. If y'all can see it, can y'all see it? Here's my actual account, and then here is my actual club. But this is my account. So y'all can write that down really quick, and then we can talk. And again, this is my club if y'all want to join it. But that's my account. Should have put them side by side, actually. But I don't know. But yeah, hopefully y'all got that. Did y'all get it? Can I get like a 1 or whatever in the chat?
I actually typed it in the chat.
Okay.
Hebrew of Israel @ Hebrew Israel, yeah. So I'll be there, but I'm probably going to be visiting another rim while you're doing it.
Okay.
I'll be asleep, in other words.
Right.
But I'll log in. Okay, Mike for real has it, so I guess he'll be tagging along.
All right.
All right. Once again, just want to say, great presentation, brother, and
thank you.
Everybody's excited. They want to see more, so we can't wait till the next one, man.
Yeah, I can't wait to come back and tell it, show it.
All right, folks. If you guys want to, chop it up with this brother, just head over to Clubhouse. He is making himself available so you guys can pick his brain, ask questions, and build from there. But I gotta go to bed. So shalom to everybody.
Facts. It's late. All right, shalom.